The wind that tore through the settlement of Bitter Creek was not merely moving air. It was a living, spiteful thing that carried the grit of 3 counties in its teeth. It scoured the clapboard siding of the false front buildings and stung the eyes of the few souls foolish enough to be out after sunset. It was a late November evening, the kind where the cold did not just sit on the skin, but worked its way into the bone, promising a winter that would be long and unforgiving. Hannah leaned into the gale, her head ducked low, clutching a small burlap sack of flour against her chest as if it were gold dust. In her other hand, wrapped in brown butcher paper that was already becoming translucent with grease, was a slab of salt pork no wider than her own hand. It was the cheapest cut the grocer had, mostly fat and rind, but it would have to flavor the beans for the rest of the week. She stopped for a moment, turning her back to the wind to catch her breath. Her fingers, red and stiff inside her threadbare wool gloves, ached with a dull, throbbing rhythm. She opened her hand just enough to look at the coins remaining there. 3 copper pennies and a single nickel. That was all that stood between her and absolute ruin. She stared at the dull metal, her lips moving silently as she calculated. If she finished the mending for Mrs. Higgins by Tuesday, she might earn another 50 cents. If the laundry for the miners came in steady, she might make $1. But the coal oil was running low, and Jem needed boots before the snows came in earnest. She closed her fist tight, shoving the hand back into the pocket of her coat. It was a man's coat, cut down and restitched to fit her slender frame, dyed a dark charcoal to hide the wear. It was warm, though, and vanity had long ago ceased to be a concern for Hannah. Turning back into the wind, she hurried down the main thoroughfare. The sun had vanished behind the western ridges an hour ago, leaving the sky a bruised purple that was quickly fading to black. The only light came from the flickering kerosene lamps in windows and the yellow spill of light from the Golden Steer saloon ahead. Hannah tightened her jaw. She had to pass the saloon to get to the boarding house. There was no other way unless she wanted to cut through the muddy, trash-strewn alleyways where the rats were as big as cats and the drunks slept off their stupor. She kept her eyes fixed on the frozen ruts of the road, her pace quickening. Piano music, tinny and frantic, bled out through the saloon doors, mixed with the low roar of male laughter and the clink of glass. As she drew level with the entrance, the bat-wing doors swung open. 2 men stumbled out, trailing cigar smoke and the sour reek of whiskey. They leaned against the doorframe, blocking the boardwalk. One of them, a tall man with a hat pulled low and a thick mustache, spotted her. He nudged his companion. "Well now," the man drawled, his voice loud enough to carry over the wind. "Look at that, a pretty little widow walking all alone in the dark." Hannah did not slow down. She did not look up. She fixed her gaze on a loose board in the walkway 10 feet ahead. "Awful cold night to be by yourself, darlin'," the second man called out. He whistled, a sharp, piercing sound. "You come on inside. We will buy you a drink to warm those cold hands." "She is too good for the likes of us. Bill," the first man laughed, though the sound was hard and ugly. "She saves her warmth for the washboard. Do you not, Hannah?" The sound of her own name on their lips made her stomach turn over. It was a small town. Everyone knew everyone's business, and a woman without a husband was fair game for speculation and cruelty. She felt their eyes on her back as she passed, heavy and predatory. She imagined them watching the sway of her skirts, judging the poverty of her coat, making wagers on how long she could last before she broke. She did not breathe easily until she had turned the corner, leaving the music and the laughter behind. The boarding house stood at the end of the street, a 2-story structure that leaned slightly to the left, as if tired of standing upright. It had once been white, but the prairie dust had scoured it to a dull gray. Hannah climbed the wooden steps, which groaned under her slight weight. She wiped the dust from her face before pushing open the heavy oak door. The hallway smelled of boiled cabbage and lye soap, a smell that had permeated the wood over 20 years of boarders. She made for the stairs, hoping to reach her room unseen, but the door to the parlor creaked open. Mr. Parsons stepped out. He was a soft man in a hard country, with a belly that strained the buttons of his vest and hands that were always slightly damp. He wiped his mouth with a handkerchief, his small eyes narrowing as they landed on Hannah. "Mrs. Kincaid," he said. His voice was smooth, like oil on water. "I was hoping to catch you." Hannah stopped, one hand on the banister. She forced a polite smile onto her face, though every muscle in her body went rigid. "Good evening, Mr. Parsons. It is a bitter night out there." "Bitter indeed," Parsons said. He took a step closer, invading her personal space just enough to make her want to step back, but she held her ground. He looked at the sack of flour in her arm, then back to her face. "I noticed you were a little short on the rent last week. Hannah, and tomorrow is the 1st of the month." "I know, Mr. Parsons," Hannah said, her voice steady despite the thumping of her heart. "I have the laundry coming in from the hotel tomorrow morning. I will have the full amount for you by Friday evening." Parsons tutted softly, shaking his head. "Friday, that is 3 days late." "I run a business, Mrs. Kincaid. I have men lining up for rooms, men who can pay in gold on the day it is due." "I have never missed a month," Hannah said, lifting her chin. "You know I am good for it." Parsons took another step. He was close enough now that she could smell the onions he had eaten for supper. He lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "It is hard for a woman alone. I understand that. Truly, I do. A pretty woman like you should not have to scrub other men's dirt to survive." He reached out, his damp fingers grazing the sleeve of her coat. Hannah flinched, pulling her arm back sharply. "The money will be there on Friday, Mr. Parsons," she said, her voice turning to ice. Parsons let his hand drop, but his smile did not waver. It shifted, becoming something darker. "You know, Hannah, there are other ways to settle a debt, softer ways. You need not work your fingers to the bone. A woman's company is worth a great deal in a town like this, especially to a lonely man." The implication hung in the air between them, gross and heavy. Hannah felt a flush of heat rise up her neck, not from embarrassment, but from a sudden, blinding rage. She tightened her grip on the flour sack until her knuckles turned white. "I will pay you in coin, Mr. Parsons," she said, "just as I always have. Good night." She turned and hurried up the stairs, her boots striking the wood hard. She did not look back, but she could feel him watching her, standing at the bottom of the stairs with that wet, knowing smile on his face. Her room was at the very end of the hall on the 2nd floor, the smallest room in the house, tucked under the eaves where the roof slanted sharply. She fumbled with her key, her hands shaking now, and unlocked the door. She slipped inside and threw the bolt lock immediately. Only then did she let out the breath she had been holding. She leaned her back against the door, closing her eyes for a second to steady herself. The room was freezing. The fire in the small cast-iron stove had burned down to embers, and the air inside was barely warmer than the air outside. A soft, hacking sound came from the corner. Hannah pushed herself away from the door and hurried to the narrow bed pushed against the far wall. A mound of blankets shifted, and a small, pale face peered out. "Mama? I am here. Jem," Hannah said, her voice instantly softening. She set the flour and pork on the small table and knelt beside the bed. She brushed the hair back from her son's forehead. His skin felt dry and a little too warm. Jem was 6 years old, but he looked smaller. The last year had been hard on him. The fever in the spring had taken his strength and left him with a cough that rattled deep in his chest whenever the weather turned. He looked up at her with large, dark eyes that were too old for his face. "Did you get the flour?" he asked, his voice scratchy. "I did," Hannah said, "and a piece of pork. We will have a proper stew tonight, Jem, with dumplings." She stood up and went to the stove. Her movements were efficient, born of long practice in tight spaces. She opened the grate and stirred the embers, adding a handful of kindling and a few precious lumps of coal from the bucket. She blew on it gently until the flames caught, casting a flickering orange glow over the room. The room was small, scarcely 10 feet by 12. It served as kitchen, parlor, bedroom, and workroom. A heavy curtain hung across one corner, concealing the wash tubs and the piles of dirty laundry she took in from the miners and cowboys. A single window looked out over the back alley and the livery stable beyond. Hannah busied herself with the meal. She melted a sliver of lard in the pot, diced the salt pork into tiny cubes, and browned them. She added water from the pitcher and mixed the flour with a little water and salt to make the dough for dumplings. It was a thin meal, barely enough to fill a grown man's belly, let alone 2 people. But she made a production of it, stirring and seasoning with the last pinch of dried sage she had saved from the summer. As the pot simmered, Hannah sat at the table and pulled the basket of mending toward her. She took out a blue work shirt with a tear in the shoulder. She threaded her needle by the light of the kerosene lamp. 1, she whispered to herself. 5 cents. She picked up a pair of trousers with a blown-out knee. 2, 10 cents, she calculated as she stitched. If she worked until midnight, she could finish 3 shirts and the trousers. That would be 25 cents. It was not enough. It was never enough. They ate in silence, the wind rattling the window pane in its frame. Jem ate hungrily, scraping his bowl clean. Hannah ate slowly, chewing each bite thoroughly to make it last, though she gave the largest portion of the meat to the boy. After supper, she washed the bowls in the basin and tucked Jem back into the bed. She sat on the edge of the mattress, singing a low, quiet song, an old ballad her mother had taught her about the green hills of Kentucky, a place Hannah barely remembered. "Mama," Jem whispered as his eyes drifted shut. "Mr. Parsons was yelling earlier." Hannah stiffened. "Did he come to the door?" "No, he was in the hall, yelling at the man in room 4. He said everyone has to pay or get out." Hannah smoothed the blanket over his shoulder. "Do not worry about Mr. Parsons. Jem, we will pay. We always do." "I can work," Jem said sleepily. "I can help Mr. Miller at the livery. He said I'm good at sweeping." "You will do no such thing," Hannah said firmly. "You will get strong. Jeremiah Kincaid, that is your job. You get strong and you go to the schoolhouse when the term starts. I will handle the money." Jem did not answer. He was already asleep, his breathing rasping slightly in the quiet room. Hannah returned to the table and the pile of mending. The wind outside picked up, howling around the eaves of the house like a pack of wolves. The lamp flickered, casting dancing shadows on the peeling wallpaper. Hannah's eyes burned with fatigue, but she forced herself to keep stitching. Every stitch was a barrier between her and the street. It was past midnight when it happened. A sudden, violent gust shook the entire house, making the timbers groan. Amidst the roar of the wind, Hannah heard a distinct, heavy sound from outside. It was a dull thud, followed by the clatter of wood, as if something large had fallen against the back of the livery stable that abutted the alley below her window. Hannah froze, her needle poised in midair. She waited, listening. Silence returned, save for the wind. She lowered the shirt. Fear, sharp and familiar, pricked at her. It could be anything. A loose shutter, a drunk stumbling home and falling into the trash barrels, a coyote knocking over a crate. If it is a coyote, she thought, her practical mind overriding her fear, it might get into the scrap bucket behind the livery. Mr. Miller, the livery owner, sometimes left vegetable peelings or stale oats in a barrel for the poor to take for their pigs or chickens. Hannah did not have livestock, but she had sometimes salvaged a bruised apple or a potato that wasn't too rotted. If an animal got to it, that was food wasted. Or, if it was a man, a drunk who had dropped a bottle, there might be glass to avoid in the morning. She hesitated. The fire was dying down, and the room was growing cold again. The sensible thing to do was to blow out the lamp and go to sleep on her pallet on the floor, but the sound had been heavy, too heavy for a coyote. Hannah sighed. A puff of white mist in the chilly air. She stood up and wrapped her thick woolen shawl around her shoulders. She picked up the lantern, lighting it from the stove, and moved to the door. "Just a quick look," she whispered to herself. She crept down the back stairs, which were narrow and steep, used mostly by the servants and the poorer tenants. The cold hit her like a physical blow as she opened the back door. The wind whipped her skirts around her legs and threatened to extinguish the lantern. She shielded the glass chimney with her hand and stepped into the alley. The alley was a narrow canyon of frozen mud and shadows between the boarding house and the livery stable. The smell of horse manure and wet hay was strong here. Hannah held the lantern high, the yellow circle of light pushing back the dark. At first, she saw nothing but the frosted ruts of the ground and the stacks of crates against the livery wall. She took a few steps forward, the snow crunching under her worn boots. Then she saw it. A boot. A worn leather boot, the sole separating at the toe, protruding from behind a stack of rain barrels. Hannah stopped. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She should turn back. A man in the alley at this hour meant nothing but trouble. He was likely drunk, or a thief, or worse. But then the boot moved. It scraped feebly against the dirt, a spasm of movement that spoke of pain rather than aggression. Hannah bit her lip. She thought of Elias. She thought of the day the foreman had come to her door, hat in hand, to tell her that her husband was dead. He had lain in the rubble of the mine shaft for 3 hours before they got to him. 3 hours alone in the dark. She could not leave a dog to freeze on a night like this, let alone a man. Gritting her teeth, Hannah moved forward. She rounded the barrels. A man lay crumpled in the dirt, curled on his side. He was large, long limbs drawn up tight against the cold. He wore a canvas coat that was shredded at the shoulder and dark with grime. His hat had fallen off, revealing dark hair matted with dirt. Hannah lowered the lantern. The light fell on his face. He was gray, the color of old ash. His cheeks were hollow, covered in a week's worth of dark stubble. There was a nasty bruise blooming on his temple and a cut on his cheekbone that looked angry and infected. He was shivering so violently that his teeth clacked together with a sound like dry bones. "Mister?" Hannah called out, her voice snatched away by the wind. The man did not answer. His eyes were closed. She stepped closer, holding the lantern near his face. "Mister, you cannot sleep here. You will freeze," he groaned. A low, guttural sound. His eyelids fluttered, opening just a crack. His eyes were dark, glassy with fever or exhaustion. He tried to push himself up on one elbow, but his arm gave way, and he collapsed back into the mud. "Sorry," he rasped. The word was barely audible. "Sorry," in the way. The politeness of it, the absurdity of apologizing for dying in an alley, struck Hannah hard. He did not sound like the drunks who cursed her on the street. She looked around. The livery was locked tight. The saloon lights were out now. There was no one to call. If she left him here to go find the sheriff, he would likely be dead by the time she came back, and the sheriff would likely just drag him to a cell to freeze on the stone floor anyway. Hannah set the lantern on top of a crate. She crouched down in the mud, heedless of her skirts. "You have to get up," she said, grabbing his arm. "Can you hear me? You have to get up." "Can't," he whispered. "Tired." "I know," Hannah said. She felt the heat radiating from him through his coat. He was burning up. "But if you stay here, you will not wake up. Come on." She hooked her hands under his armpit and pulled. It was like trying to move a boulder. He was dead weight, heavy with muscle and bone. "Help me," she gritted out, slipping in the mud. "You have to help me." Some commands cut through the fog of unconsciousness. The man groaned and managed to get one knee under him. Hannah wedged her shoulder under his good arm. "On 3, she said. 1, 2, 3. They heaved upward. Hannah's knees buckled under the sudden weight, but she locked her legs, gasping. He was a giant compared to her, towering over her even as he slumped. He leaned heavily against her, his head lolling onto her shoulder. He smelled of sweat and blood and the dry dust of the plains. "Walk," she ordered. They began a slow, agonizing shuffle toward the back door. Every step was a battle. The wind pushed against them, trying to knock them over. Hannah's boots slipped on the ice. The man stumbled, nearly dragging her down, but she tightened her grip on his belt, holding him up with a strength she did not know she possessed. Just a little farther, she panted. "Just to the door." They reached the steps. Getting him up the narrow staircase was a nightmare of grunts and scraping boots. Hannah had to shove him from behind, guiding his feet, terrified that they would both tumble backward into the dark. By the time they reached the top landing, Hannah's lungs were burning, and sweat was trickling down her back despite the freezing cold. She fumbled for her key, unlocked the door, and kicked it open. "Inside," she gasped. "Last bit." She dragged him across the threshold and kicked the door shut behind them, shutting out the wind. The silence of the room was sudden and ringing. She steered him toward the bed. "Down! Sit!" He collapsed more than sat, falling onto the narrow mattress. The rusted springs squealed in protest. He rolled onto his side, curling up instantly, shivering so hard the bed frame rattled. Hannah stood there for a moment, hands on her knees, gasping for air. Her heart was racing like a trapped bird. She looked at him, a dirty, dangerous stranger in her room, in her bed, with her child sleeping 5 feet away. "What have I done?" she thought. "Parsons will throw me out for sure if he finds out." But the deed was done. She could not drag him back out now. She moved to the bed. "We have to get these wet things off you," she whispered. She knelt and tugged at his boots. They were worn through at the sole. The leather cracked. She pulled them off, revealing socks that were little more than holes held together by wool. His feet were ice cold. She stood and unbuttoned his coat. It was stiff with frozen mud. She peeled it off him, then hesitated at his shirt. It was flannel, torn in places. "I need to check your ribs," she said, more to herself than to him. She undid the buttons with shaking fingers. When she pulled the shirt open, she hissed in a breath. His torso was a map of violence. A massive bruise, purple and black, spanned his left side, wrapping around his ribs. It looked like he had been kicked by a horse or beaten with a club. There were other marks, too, older scars, white lines against tanned skin, and faint, circular burns around his wrists that looked like rope burns. Hannah went to the stove and poured warm water from the kettle into a basin. She grabbed a clean rag, one of the rags she used for ironing, and dipped it in. She returned to the bedside and began to wash the grime from his face. As the dirt came away, she saw the lines of his face more clearly. He was younger than she had thought, perhaps 30. His jaw was strong, covered in dark stubble. His nose had been broken once, long ago, giving him a rugged, uneven profile. The warm cloth seemed to rouse him slightly. His eyes opened again. Fixing on her face, they were hazel, flecked with gold in the firelight, and filled with confusion. "Who?" he murmured. "It does not matter," Hannah said softly, wiping the dried blood from the cut on his cheek. "You are safe." He flinched when she touched the bruise on his ribs. "Broken?" she asked. He shook his head, a tiny movement. "Cracked, maybe. You look like you went 10 rounds with a threshing machine," she said. He tried to smile, but it was just a grimace. "You shouldn't have." "Hush," she said. "Save your breath." She reached for the bottle of whiskey she kept for medicinal purposes, mostly for toothaches or fevers. There was only a little left in the bottom. She poured it into a tin cup and added a splash of warm water. "Drink this," she ordered, lifting his head. He drank, coughing as the spirit hit his throat, but the color came back to his cheeks a little. He lay back, his breathing ragged. "My name is Cole," he whispered. "Cole," Hannah repeated. "Just Cole?" He nodded. "Just Cole. Do you have kin here? Cole? Someone I can fetch?" He shook his head. The movement was heavy with exhaustion. "No one. Just passing through. Got waylaid." "Waylaid is a polite word for it," Hannah noted, looking at his empty pockets and missing gear. "I'll be gone. By morning," he mumbled, his eyes drifting shut again. "Won't trouble you." "You will be lucky if you can stand by morning," Hannah said quietly. "Now sleep." From the corner of the room, a small voice piped up. "Mama?" Hannah turned. Jem was sitting up in his nest of blankets on the floor. She had moved him there to give the man the bed, though she hadn't fully processed it. His eyes were wide, fixed on the stranger. "Who is that man?" Jem whispered, fear edging his voice. Hannah went to him immediately. Kneeling on the rough floorboards, she gathered her son into her arms. "It is just a traveler, Jem," she soothed, smoothing his hair. "He was sick and cold outside. We are just letting him warm up." "Is he bad?" Jem asked. "Is he a bad man?" Hannah looked over her shoulder at the unconscious figure on the bed. He looked broken, defeated, but she remembered the rope burns on his wrists, the scars. Violence followed some men like a shadow. "I do not know," Hannah admitted softly. Then she tightened her hug. "But he is hurt, and we do not leave people to hurt if we can help it, remember?" "Like the bird with the broken wing?" Jem asked. "Yes, like the bird." "Will he hurt us?" "No," Hannah said, injecting a steel into her voice she did not feel. "Mama won't let anything bad happen, I promise." She felt the weight of that lie settle in her chest. She could not promise that. She could barely promise they would have food next week. But a mother's job was to build a wall of words against the dark, even if the wall was made of paper. "Go back to sleep, my love," she whispered. Jem lay back down, keeping one wary eye on the bed until his exhaustion overtook him. Hannah did not sleep. She pulled her stool to the space between the bed and the stove. She added the last heavy log to the fire, deciding the warmth was worth the cost tonight. She sat there, wrapped in her shawl, watching the rise and fall of the stranger's chest. The wind continued to howl outside, battering the little house. But inside, the only sound was the breathing of the two males, one small and wheezing, one large and ragged. She studied Cole's face in the dim light. Even in sleep, his brow was furrowed, his jaw set tight. He did not look like a man at peace. He looked like a man who was fighting a war inside his own head. There was a dignity to his face, though stubbornness. He had thanked her with the manners of a gentleman, even while lying in the mud. Hannah realized her hands were trembling. The adrenaline of the rescue was fading, leaving her cold and terrified. What would the town say if they knew? A widow with a strange man in her room. Parsons would cast her out without a backward glance. They would be on the street. "I should have left him," a cold voice in her head whispered. "I have to think of Jem." But then she looked at Cole's hand, resting on top of the rough wool blanket. It was a large hand, broad and calloused, battered and scarred. It lay open, palm up, fingers slightly curled. It looked helpless. It looked like a hand reaching out for something it had lost. It reminded her of Elias's hand, the last time she had held it in the coffin. She could not have left him. Whatever the cost, she could not have walked away. Hannah slid off the stool and curled up on the hard floorboards near the stove, pulling her knees to her chest. She kept her face turned toward the man on the bed, watching him, guarding him, fearing him. Exhaustion finally pulled her under. The last thing she saw was that open hand in the firelight, reaching into the empty air. The gray light of dawn did not so much enter the room as it seeped through the threadbare muslin curtain like dirty water. Hannah woke with a gasp, her heart hammering against her ribs before her eyes had even fully opened. She sat bolt upright, the thin blanket pooling at her waist. Her hand instinctively scrabbled across the floorboards for the iron stove poker. For a terrifying second, the shape on her bed was a monster, a threat, a shadow that had come to swallow her whole. Then the memory of the night before crashed down on her. The wind, the alley, the weight of the man she had dragged up the stairs. She lowered the poker, her breath hitching in her throat. The stranger, Cole, was still there. He was sprawled on her narrow mattress, his legs too long for the frame, one arm hanging limp over the side, his knuckles grazing the floor. In the harsh light of morning, he looked even worse than he had by lantern light. His skin was the color of tallow, drawn tight over high cheekbones, and the dark stubble on his jaw stood out like iron filings. Hannah pushed her hair out of her face, shivering as the morning chill bit through her nightdress. She had slept in her clothes. minus the boots. But the fire had died in the night, and the room was freezing. A groan from the bed made her freeze. Cole's eyes flew open. For a moment, they were wild, unseeing, darting around the cramped room like a trapped animal. Then his gaze landed on her, crouched on the floor with the poker in her hand. Confusion gave way to a sudden, crushing shame. He tried to sit up. His voice was a rusted hinge. He cleared his throat and tried again. I fell asleep. I did not mean to intrude. He placed his hands on the mattress and shoved himself upward. Hannah watched, paralyzed, as his face went white. A spasm of pain twisted his features, and he made a sharp, strangled sound in his throat. His arms gave way, and he collapsed back against the pillow, breathing hard, sweat instantly beading on his forehead despite the cold. You are not going anywhere, Hannah said. Her voice came out sharper than she intended, born of her own fright. Stay down before you break something that isn't already broken. I have to go, Cole wheezed. His eyes squeezed shut. Cannot stay here. Not right. You cannot even sit up, let alone walk down those stairs, Hannah snapped. She used the poker to open the stove door and began to stir the ash, adding a handful of kindling. And I did not drag 180 pounds of dead weight up 2 flights of stairs just to have you die on my doorstep in the morning light. It would be bad for the reputation of the boarding house. She got the fire catching, the dry wood popping and hissing. She filled the kettle from the pitcher and set it on the iron plate. Only then did she turn back to him. He was watching her now, his expression guarded. I have no money to pay you, ma'am. I did not ask for money, Hannah said. She approached the bed, wiping her hands on her apron. Let me see those ribs. He flinched away, pulling the blanket higher. It is fine. Do not be a fool. If a rib has punctured a lung, you will drown in your own blood. And I will have to explain the mess to Mr. Parsons. Now lie still. Her tone brooked no argument. Reluctantly, Cole lowered the blanket and unbuttoned the flannel shirt she had left on him. Hannah tried to keep her face impassive, but the bruising was hideous, the deep, mottled purple spreading from his armpit to his hip. She probed gently with her fingertips. He hissed through his teeth, his abdominal muscles seizing up under her touch. Nothing feels loose, she murmured, her professional detachment warring with the sudden intimacy of touching a strange man's warm skin. Just badly bruised. You took a hard fall. Something like that, he grunted. As she pulled his sleeve up to check his arm, she paused. Encircling both his wrists were faint, reddish lines. They were distinct and circular. Rope burns. They were not fresh, perhaps a few weeks old, but they had scarred over, and on the back of his knuckles, there were older, white scars, the kind a man got from years of fighting or hard labor. Hannah looked at his face. Did you fall into a rope, too? Cole pulled his hand back sharply, tugging the sleeve down. I ran into some trouble on the trail. That is all. What kind of trouble? The kind that takes a man's horse and his gear and leaves him walking for 3 days without water, Cole said flatly. I was hired to drive north. Ran into 3 men who decided they needed my mount more than I did. He looked away, staring at the cracked plaster of the wall. Hannah saw something flicker in his eyes, not just anger, but a deep, burning humiliation. It was the look of a man who was used to being the one holding the gun, not the one looking down the barrel. Well, Hannah said, stepping back, you are alive. That is more than most get in these parts. She went to the pot the night before. The stew had congealed into a cold, gray jelly, but she heated it up until it bubbled. She ladled a small portion into a chipped ceramic bowl, saving the meat for Jem, and brought it to him. Eat, she commanded. Cole took the bowl. His hands shook so badly the spoon rattled against the rim. He took one mouthful, then another. He tried to eat slowly, to show some manners, but his body betrayed him. He shoveled the food into his mouth, scraping the bottom of the bowl, his eyes closing as the warmth hit his empty stomach. Hannah watched him from the table, her own stomach rumbling. She recognized that hunger. She had seen it in her husband's face during the lean months. She felt it in her own belly every time she gave Jem the larger half of the bread. It was a specific, hollow ache that took away a person's pride. "Thank you," Cole said when the bowl was clean. His voice was stronger now. "That was the best thing I have ever tasted." It was salt pork and water," Hannah said dryly. "But hunger makes a fine sauce." Before Cole could answer, a heavy fist pounded on the door. The sound was like a gunshot in the small room. Hannah jumped, her hand flying to her throat. Jem, who had been sleeping soundly in his nest of blankets, sat up with a start, his eyes wide. "Mrs. Kincaid." The voice was muffled by the wood, but unmistakable. "Mr. Parsons." "I know you're in there. Open up." Hannah's blood ran cold. "Hide," she whispered to Cole. "I am not hiding from—" "Get behind the curtain," she hissed, her eyes blazing. "If he sees you, we are on the street. Do you understand? He will throw my boy into the snow." Cole looked at Jem, then at the terror in Hannah's face. He set the bowl down and dragged himself off the bed. He moved stiffly, clutching his side, and slipped behind the faded floral curtain that separated her sleeping area from the wash tubs. Hannah smoothed her hair, took a deep breath, and unlocked the door. Mr. Parsons stood in the hallway, leaning on a cane he did not really need. He wore a velvet vest that was slightly too tight, and the smell of bay rum and stale cigar smoke rolled off him in waves. "Good morning, Hannah," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Mr. Parsons," Hannah said, backing up until her legs hit the table. "I did not expect you so early." "Business never sleeps," Parsons said, his eyes roaming over the room. He looked at the unmade bed, then at Jem on the floor. "And I wanted to make sure you had not forgotten our conversation yesterday." "I have not forgotten," Hannah said tightly. "Friday. I will have the money Friday." Parsons sighed, a theatrical, wet sound. He walked further into the room, his boots loud on the floorboards. He stopped by the stove, running a finger along the mantel. "You know, Hannah," he said, his voice dropping to that oily purr she loathed, "I have been thinking. It is a cold winter. A woman alone, it is dangerous. You need protection. You need a friend." He turned to her, stepping close enough that she could see the broken capillaries in his nose. "I could be a friend," he said. "A very good friend. You would not have to worry about rent. You could have a bigger room, maybe some new clothes for the boy." Hannah felt sick. "I am managing, Mr. Parsons." "Are you?" He reached out, his hand brushing a stray lock of hair from her shoulder. His fingers were damp and hot. "You look tired, my dear. I'm so tired. Why fight so hard when you could just be nice?" Hannah forced herself not to recoil, forced a polite, brittle smile onto her face. "I appreciate your concern, sir, but I will have the money. I have a lot of laundry to do today." Parsons stared at her for a long moment, his gaze dropping to her chest, then back to her eyes. He licked his lips. "Friday, then noon. If you do not have it, well, we will have to discuss those other arrangements." He turned and walked out, leaving the door open. Hannah rushed to close it, throwing the bolt with trembling fingers. She leaned her forehead against the wood, closing her eyes, fighting the urge to vomit. Behind her, the curtain was ripped aside. Cole stood there, and the transformation was terrifying. The man who had been barely able to stand was now upright, his feet planted wide, his fists clenched at his sides. His face was a mask of fury, his hazel eyes burning with a cold, lethal light. "Who is he?" Cole growled. "My landlord," Hannah whispered, turning around. "He put his hands on you." Cole said, "It wasn't a question." He took a step toward the door. "I will break his neck." "No!" Hannah lunged forward, grabbing his arm. It was like grabbing a tree branch. He was rigid with tension. "You will do no such thing." "He threatened you," Cole said, looking down at her, his voice shaking with rage. "He treated you like a Like a woman without a husband in a town run by men, Hannah cut in, her voice rising. She laughed, a bitter, sharp sound. Do you think he is the first? Do you think you are telling me something I do not know? Cole stared at her, the violence slowly ebbing from his posture, replaced by a look of shock. If you touch him, Hannah said, dropping her hand, he throws us out. He owns this building. He owns the sheriff. You break his neck, and they hang you, and Jem and I freeze to death under the boardwalk. Is that what you want? Cole's jaw worked. He looked at the door, then back at Hannah. The fight drained out of him, leaving him looking exhausted and smaller than before. I should have shown him his place, Cole muttered. His place is the man who holds the deed, Hannah said tiredly, and my place is the woman who pays him. That is the world. Cole. Cole looked down at his hands, scarred, empty hands. It is not right. Right does not put coal in the stove, Hannah said. She walked to the corner and picked up a basket of dirty shirts. Now, if you are staying, you stay hidden. I have work to do. Cole did not leave. He insisted he would not be a burden, that he would rest for one day and then find work. Hannah wanted to argue, to tell him to go, but when she looked at his gray face and the way he held his ribs, she could not do it. Over the next 3 days, a strange rhythm settled over the tiny room. Cole was as good as his word. He forced himself out of bed the next morning, gritting his teeth against the pain. He found a loose board near the window that had been letting in the draft and fixed it using a nail he pried from a crate and the heel of his boot. He mixed a paste of flour and water to patch a crack in the plaster. He climbed onto a chair, wincing as he stretched, and wired the stovepipe so it stopped leaking smoke into the room. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of a man who knew how to work. He did not talk much, but his presence filled the room. It was smaller with him in it, yet somehow less fragile. Hannah tried to ignore him as she scrubbed clothes in the tin tub, but it was impossible. He insisted on carrying the buckets of water up the stairs for her, taking 2 at a time despite his injury. His jaw set in a stubborn line. I can do it, Hannah would protest. I am earning my keep, he would answer, setting the heavy buckets down without spilling a drop. Jem was the first to truly accept him. The boy, usually shy, was drawn to the quiet giant. He watched Cole whittle a piece of kindling into a whistle. Do you know horses? Jem asked one evening, peering over the edge of the table. Cole looked up, his eyes crinkling at the corners. I know a few. I know a horse that can untie a knot with his teeth. Truly? Jem's eyes went round. Truly, Cole said. His name is Buster. He is a bay gelding with a white star on his nose, and he will steal an apple out of your pocket if you do not watch him closely. Cole started humming then, a low, rhythmic tune that sounded like the beat of hoofs on the prairie. It was a trail song, sad and lonely, but he made it sound comforting. Hannah, mending a shirt by the lamp, found herself pausing to listen, the melody wrapping around her heart like a warm blanket. On the 4th day, Cole announced he was going out. You are not well enough, Hannah said, looking at the way he still favored his left side. I need money. Cole said simply, I will not eat your food for free another day. He put on his torn coat, pulled his hat low over his eyes, and walked out. He went to the livery stable. The owner, a sour-faced man named Miller, looked Cole up and down with open suspicion. I do not need drifters, Miller spat, chewing on a piece of straw. I need men who work. I work, Cole said. I will muck the stalls. 50 cents for the day. Miller laughed. 50 cents. I will give you 25, and you will thank me for it. Cole didn't argue. He took the shovel. He worked for 6 hours, clearing the heavy, wet manure, laying down fresh straw, hauling grain sacks. His ribs screamed with every lift of the shovel. Sweat soaked his shirt, stinging his cuts. But he did not stop. He worked with a relentless, punishing rhythm, as if he were trying to sweat the shame of the last few days out of his pores. Around noon, a commotion broke out in the corral. A young, dappled gray colt was rearing and kicking, terror in its eyes, while two stable hands shouted and waved ropes, only making it worse. "Get back," one shouted. "He's crazy." Cole dropped his shovel. He vaulted the fence, landing softly in the mud. He didn't shout. He didn't wave his arms. He simply walked toward the horse, his body loose, his head down. "Easy now," Cole murmured. His voice changed. It dropped an octave, becoming a vibration more than a sound. "Easy, son. Nobody's going to hurt you." The stable hands watched in stunned silence. The colt rolled its eyes, snorting, its hooves striking the earth. Cole kept coming, slow and steady, radiating a calm authority. He reached out a hand, palm flat. The colt flinched, but didn't run. Cole touched the animal's neck, his hand moving in slow, reassuring circles. He whispered something into the horse's ear. The colt let out a long, shuddering breath and lowered its head, nuzzling Cole's chest. Mr. Miller, watching from the barn door, narrowed his eyes. That wasn't the touch of a stable boy. That was a horseman. "Who are you?" Miller asked later, as he slapped 3 silver dimes into Cole's hand, more than the agreed 25 cents. "Just a man looking for work," Cole said, pocketing the coins. He walked to the edge of the corral, resting his arms on the rail. The wind was picking up again, blowing from the north. He looked out past the town, past the scrub brush, toward the violet line of hills in the distance. Beyond those hills lay the Double Bar Ranch, his father's land, his land. He could picture the great house, the warm fire, the table loaded with beef and bread. He could be there in 2 days' riding, but he saw his brother's face. He saw the disappointment in his father's eyes. "You were always too hot-headed. Cole, you ruin everything you touch." The shame twisted in his chest, sharper than the pain in his ribs. He turned his back on the hills and walked back toward the boarding house. It was late when he returned. Hannah was still awake, scrubbing a miner's heavy canvas trousers in the tub, her knuckles red and raw, the water turning gray with grit. Cole walked to the table and placed the 3 dimes on the wood. They clinked softly. Hannah looked up, wiping a strand of hair from her face with a wet wrist. "What is this?" "Pay," Cole said, "for the room and the food." Hannah frowned. "I told you, I do not want your money." "And I told you I do not take charity," Cole said, his voice hard. "Take it." "I will not," Hannah said, standing up. She was small compared to him, but she bristled with indignation. "You need boots. You need a warm coat. Keep your money." "I do not need boots," Cole snapped. "I need to pay my debts. Take the damn money." "Hannah." "Do not curse in this house," she fired back. "And do not tell me what to take. You think 3 dimes fixes everything? You think it buys back your pride?" The words hung in the air. Cole flinched as if she had slapped him. Hannah immediately regretted it. She saw the exhaustion in his slump, the gray pallor returning to his face. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I am just tired." "I know," Cole said softly. He pushed the coins toward her. "Please, it makes me feel useful. Let me be useful." Hannah looked at the coins, then at him. She saw the desperation in his eyes. He needed this. He needed to be more than a stray dog she had fed. "All right," she said quietly. She took the coins and dropped them into the jar on the shelf. "Thank you, Cole." They stood there for a moment in the dim light, the tension of the argument dissolving into a shared, heavy weariness. That night, the temperature plummeted, the wind shifted, coming straight down from the Canadian Shield, bringing a cold that cracked stones. The northers slammed into the house around midnight, shaking the timbers and driving freezing air through every gap in the siding. The stove, despite Cole's repairs, could not fight it. The water in the pitcher on the table froze solid. Hannah woke to the sound of Jem crying. She scrambled out of her blankets on the floor, her teeth chattering so hard her jaw ached. She went to the bed where Jem was curled into a tight ball. He was shaking violently. "Mama," he wept. It hurts. The cold hurts. I know, baby, I know, Hannah said, trying to rub warmth into his small arms. She piled her own shawl on top of him, but the blankets were too thin. The cold was seeping up through the mattress from below. He is freezing. Cole's voice came from the dark. Hannah turned. Cole was sitting up on his pallet near the door. He had insisted on taking the floor once he could walk. Giving the bed back to Jem, he was wrapped in his coat, shivering. Stove, Hannah said. I need more wood. We are out of wood, Cole said grimly. I burned the last log an hour ago. Jem wailed. A high, thin sound of misery. Cole stood up. He hesitated, shifting his weight. Hannah. She looked at him. What? This cold. It kills, he said. Body heat is the only thing that will stop it. We need to combine the blankets. Hannah stared at him. What are you saying? I am saying we sleep together, Cole said, his voice rough. On the floor, by the stove. It is the warmest spot. You, me, and the boy. Heat flushed Hannah's cheeks, burning hot against the freezing air. To lie with a man who was not her husband? It was improper. It was scandalous. If Parsons knew, my boy's turning blue, Hannah thought. Property would not keep Jem's heart beating. All right, she said, her voice trembling. All right. They moved quickly. Cole dragged the mattress off the bed frame and placed it right in front of the dying stove. He spread his coat over the floorboards beneath it for insulation. Hannah gathered every scrap of fabric they owned, the quilts, the shawls, the spare clothes. Put the boy in the middle, Cole instructed. Hannah laid Jem down. The boy was still shivering, his lips pale. Cole lay down on one side of him, turning onto his side to curl his large body around the child's back. Come on, Cole said, looking up at Hannah. Hannah hesitated one last second, then blew out the lamp. The room plunged into darkness, save for the faint red glow of the stove vents. She lay down on the other side of Jem, facing inward. She pulled the mountain of blankets over them. It was awkward at first, a tangle of limbs and stiff apprehension. But slowly, the physics of survival took over. Cole was like a furnace. The heat radiating from him was immense. It soaked into Jem's back, stopping his shivering within minutes. Hannah, pressed against Jem's front, felt the warmth travel through the boy to her. Is that better, Jem? Cole whispered. Yes, Jem mumbled sleepily. Warm now. The boy drifted off almost instantly. Exhausted by the cold, Hannah lay awake in the dark. The wind screamed outside, a banshee trying to tear the roof off, but under the blankets, it was a quiet, secret world. She was painfully aware of the man inches away. Jem was small, over the top of his head. She could sense Cole's breathing. Her knees were tucked up, and as she shifted slightly to relieve a cramp, her heel brushed against Cole's shin. Both of them went rigid. Hannah held her breath. She should pull away. She should make herself small. But the cold was so deep, and the heat coming from him was so enticing. Hannah, Cole whispered. His voice was so low it was barely a vibration in the air. Yes, she breathed back. Thank you, he said, for dragging me out of the dirt. The raw sincerity in his voice made her throat ache. She thought of the open hand she'd seen that first night. She thought of him calming the horse. She thought of the 3 dimes on the table. You paid your rent, she whispered back. She felt him shift, settling deeper into the blankets. His breathing evened out, slowing into sleep. Hannah lay there, staring into the darkness. She could feel the steady thrum of his heart. Or maybe it was her own. The space between them was filled with the boy, but it felt non-existent. She was terrified by how much she wanted to reach across that small distance, to feel those arms that could tame a wild horse wrap around her and hold the world at bay. And she was terrified by how much she wanted to push him away, to run from the inevitable pain of losing him when he finally left, because he would leave. Men like him, men with secrets and strength, always had somewhere else to go. She closed her eyes, listening to the wind, and let herself drift into sleep, suspended in the dangerous, beautiful warmth of the stranger's shadow. The winter that descended on Bitter Creek was not merely a season. It was a siege. The snow began in earnest 3 days after the first norther, falling in heavy, wet sheets that turned the world into a monochromatic study of white and gray. The wind sculpted the drifts against the north side of the buildings until they reached the windowsills, and the silence of the plains grew deep and heavy, broken only by the crack of frozen tree limbs and the mournful howl of wolves moving closer to the settlement in search of food. Work, already scarce, dwindled to near nothingness. The cattle drives had stopped for the season, the mines were running skeleton crews, and travelers were rare. Cole continued to go to the livery every morning before dawn. His breath puffing white in the dark hallway, he took whatever Mr. Miller would give him, mucking stalls, repairing harnesses, breaking ice in the troughs. Hannah watched him leave each morning, noting the way he favored his left side when the cold bit deep into his healing ribs. She saw the raw chapping on his knuckles and the way he stifled his coughs when he thought she wasn't looking. He brought home every cent he earned, placing the coins in the jar on the shelf with a quiet, stubborn pride. But the jar filled slowly, and the price of flour and coal rose with every inch of snow. One afternoon in mid-December, the sun broke through the clouds, a weak, watery disk that offered light but no heat. Hannah bundled herself in her coat and shawl, hoisting a heavy wicker basket of laundry onto her hip. Mrs. Gable at the hotel needed the linens returned, and the 50 cents would buy enough coal to last through the weekend. The main street was a treacherous sheet of packed snow and hidden ice. Hannah walked carefully, her boots finding little traction. She kept her head down against the biting wind, her mind occupied with the mental arithmetic of survival. She did not hear the wagon until it was nearly on top of her. It was a freight wagon, overloaded with timber, the driver lashing his team in a foolish attempt to beat the fading light. The horses, spooked by a snapping flag on the mercantile porch, surged forward. The wagon skidded sideways on the ice, the heavy rear wheels swinging violently toward the boardwalk where Hannah stood. "Look out!" a voice roared. Hannah turned, her eyes widening as the massive iron-rimmed wheel loomed over her. She tried to scramble back, but her boot heel caught on a loose board. She slipped, the basket flying from her hands, white sheets spilling onto the dirty snow. She fell hard, bracing for the crushing weight of the wagon. Suddenly, strong hands grabbed her. Cole had burst from the livery doors, moving with a speed that belied his injuries. He seized her around the waist, lifting her feet clear off the ground, and spun her backward into the alcove of the mercantile entrance just as the wagon smashed into the boardwalk where she'd been standing a second before. Splintered wood flew through the air. They slammed against the wall of the mercantile, Cole taking the brunt of the impact with his shoulder. For a suspended heartbeat, the world narrowed to the space between them. Hannah was pressed flat against the wall, Cole's body shielding her entirely. His arms were locked tight around her, his chest heaving against hers. She could feel the wild, sledgehammer beat of his heart through his coat. She could smell the scent of hay and horse sweat and the clean, cold air clinging to him. Her hands were fisted in the rough wool of his collar, holding on for dear life. He looked down at her, his hazel eyes wide and dark with adrenaline. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice rough. "No," Hannah gasped, staring up at him. "No, I am... You saved me." "Damn fool driver," Cole growled, glancing over his shoulder at the wagon disappearing down the street. He didn't let go. His gaze returned to her face, dropping to her mouth, then back to her eyes. The intensity of it scorched her. For a moment, neither of them moved. The cold air seemed to vanish, replaced by a heat that radiated from where their bodies touched. Hannah felt a strange, terrifying pull in her belly, a desire to lean into him, to bury her face in his neck and let him hold her up. Then she heard the titter of laughter. "Well, I never—" a voice shrilled. Hannah pulled away as if burned. She smoothed her skirts, her cheeks flushing hot, across the street. 2 women stood in the window of the dressmaker's shop, staring avidly. On the porch of the saloon, 3 men were watching, nudging each other and grinning. "Looks like the widow has found herself a warm spot," one man called out, his voice carrying easily in the crisp air. Cole stiffened, turning toward the voice, his hands curling into fists. "Cole, do not," Hannah whispered, grabbing his sleeve. "Please, just help me with the laundry." He looked at her, seeing the mortification in her eyes. He swallowed his rage, jaw working, and knelt to help her gather the scattered sheets. The linens were soiled with mud. They would have to be washed again. "I will carry it," Cole said quietly, taking the basket. "No," Hannah said, taking it back firmly. "You go back to work. If we walk together, it just gives them more to say." She turned and walked away as fast as dignity allowed, her head held high, though her eyes burned with unshed tears. She could feel the town's judgment like a physical weight on her shoulders. She was no longer just the poor widow. She was the loose woman, the one with the drifter in her bed. The change in the town was subtle at first, then blatant. When Hannah went to the general store, conversation would die down, replaced by heavy silences and side-eyed glances. The grocer, usually kind enough to offer a slightly bruised apple for Jem, now counted her change with cold efficiency and turned to the next customer before she had even left the counter. The rumor mill had churned the incident with the wagon into something sordid. The story was no longer that he had saved her life. It was that they were seen embracing in the street in broad daylight. 2 days later, Mr. Parsons came to the door. It was evening. Cole was sitting at the table, whittling a piece of pine into a toy horse for Jem. Hannah was stirring a pot of beans. When the knock came, they both went still. Hannah opened the door to find the landlord standing there, his face flushed with drink and false piety. "Mr. Parsons," Hannah said, keeping the door blocked with her body. "Mrs. Kincaid," Parsons said, swaying slightly. He did not look at her. He looked past her, at Cole sitting at the table. "I see your guest is still here." "He is paying his way," Hannah said defensively. "And the rent is paid throughout the month." "The rent is for a single woman and her child," Parsons sneered. "Not for a boarding house within a boarding house. People are talking. Hannah, decent folk do not like living under the same roof as immoral behavior." "There is nothing immoral happening here," Hannah said, her voice shaking. "He sleeps on the floor. He is helping me." "Helping you?" Parsons laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "Is that what they call it now? Listen here. If you are going to run a house of ill repute in my building, I expect a cut. The rent goes up $2 a month, starting now. Or," he stepped closer, invading her space. His hand came up, resting heavily on her forearm, his thumb rubbing against the wool of her sleeve. "Or maybe you and I can come to that arrangement I mentioned. I can be a generous man. Hannah, I can make the gossip stop." Before Hannah could pull away, a chair scraped violently against the floorboards. Cole was there in 2 strides. He did not shout. He did not raise a fist. He simply stepped between Hannah and Parsons, using his chest to force the landlord back into the hallway. "Take your hands off her," Cole said. His voice was not loud, but it had the terrifying resonance of a growl from a dark cave. It was the voice of a man who had spent his life around large, dangerous animals and knew that fear was a tool. Parsons stumbled back, catching himself on the doorframe. He looked up at Cole, his eyes widening. Cole towered over him, his face a mask of cold, controlled violence. You threaten me?" Parsons blustered, though his voice cracked. "I will have the sheriff on you. I will have you both thrown in the snow tonight." "You will do nothing," Cole said softly. "You will turn around, walk down those stairs, and leave her be. If you touch her again, if you even look at her wrong, I will forget that I am trying to be a civilized man. Do you understand?" Parsons opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at Cole's eyes and saw something that terrified him, a complete lack of hesitation. He spun on his heel and hurried down the hall, his cane tapping frantically. Cole stood in the doorway for a long moment, breathing hard, before he turned back to the room. Hannah was standing by the stove, her arms wrapped around herself. She was not looking at him with gratitude. She was looking at him with fury. "You fool!" she hissed. Cole blinked, the adrenaline fading. He was touching you. And now we will double the rent, Hannah cried, keeping her voice low so as not to wake Jem. Or he will tell the sheriff you assaulted him. Do you think you can fight the whole town? Cole, do you think your fists can stop the winter? I could not watch him treat you like a whore. Cole snapped. They already think I am one, Hannah shot back. Because of you, because you are here. And now you have made an enemy of the one man who holds the roof over my head. What happens when he throws us out? Will you keep Jem warm with your anger? I have seen women treated better in saloons than you are treated by these so-called respectable men, Cole argued, pacing the small room. I could not stand there and do nothing. You do not understand, Hannah said, tears of frustration pricking her eyes. You are a man. You can walk away. You can ride out tomorrow and leave this all behind. I have to stay here. I have to live with these people. My name is all I have, and you are burning it to the ground. I am not going anywhere, Cole said stubbornly. You say that now, Hannah said, sinking onto the stool. But you will. Everyone leaves. My husband left. He promised he would be safe, and he left me with a baby and a mountain of debt. Cole stopped pacing. He looked at her, seeing the bone-deep exhaustion in her posture. The anger drained out of him, leaving only a dull ache. My brother left, Cole said quietly. Hannah looked up. It was the first time he had spoken of his past with any detail. He didn't mean to, Cole continued, staring at the dark window. It was a fight over water rights. Stupid, meaningless. I was the older one. I was supposed to handle it. But I lost my temper. I pushed the argument. Guns were drawn. He paused, swallowing hard. His horse spooked. He was thrown, trampled before I could get to him. My father, he looked at me at the funeral. He didn't say it, but I heard it loud enough. It should have been you. The silence in the room was heavy and thick. Hannah watched him, seeing the way his shoulders slumped, the way the guilt hung on him like a coat he couldn't take off. Elias took the shift because I wanted a cradle, Hannah whispered. Cole turned to look at her. He was a good miner, Hannah said, staring at her hands. Careful, but I wanted a real cradle for the baby. Not a crate, a proper oak cradle. He took a double shift in the deep shaft for the extra pay. The timber gave way. She wiped a tear from her cheek with a rough motion. The baby came early, 3 days after the funeral. He was too small. He lived 4 hours. She looked at Cole, her eyes raw. I did not just lose a husband. I killed him with my wanting, and I lost the son he never saw. Cole moved then. He crossed the room and pulled the other stool close to hers. He sat down, his knees brushing hers. He did not touch her, but he leaned in, his presence a solid wall against the dark. It was not your fault, he said, his voice gravelly. Wanting a cradle is not a sin. Hannah, and fighting for your land is not a sin. Cole, she replied softly. They sat there for a long time as the fire burned down, 2 broken people surrounded by the ghosts of their mistakes. For the first time, the wall between them, the wall of stranger and host, man and woman, crumbled. They were just 2 survivors, sharing the weight of the stone they carried. 2 days later, Cole disappeared for the morning. He walked to the bank, ignoring the stares of the people on the street. He entered the brick building and asked to see the manager, Mr. Henderson. The clerk looked at Cole's worn coat and scoffed. Mr. Henderson is a busy man. He does not have time for— Tell him it is Cole Sterling. Cole said quietly, Of the double bar. The clerk's eyes went wide. The name Sterling was royalty in this territory. He scrambled to the back office. A moment later, a balding man in a silk vest hurried out, looking confused and anxious. Mr. Sterling, Henderson asked, looking at the ragged man before him. In the office. Cole said. Once the door was closed, Cole did not waste time on pleasantries. He refused the offer of a cigar. I need to make a withdrawal, Cole said. I know my father has accounts with this bank for the cattle transfers. He does, of course, Henderson stammered. But without identification papers, and given your— Appearance. Send a wire to the ranch, Cole said. Ask my father if Cole is still authorized to draw funds. He will say yes. He might hope I'm using it to buy a train ticket to hell, but he won't cut me off. It would look bad for the family name. It took 2 hours for the telegraph to return. When it did, Henderson's attitude shifted from suspicion to obsequious fawning. How much would you like, Mr. Sterling? $500? Cole said. And I have specific instructions. He laid it out clearly. The bank was to pay Mr. Parsons the full year's rent for Hannah Kincaid's room, plus a premium to ensure no evictions. They were to tell Parsons it was an anonymous charitable donation from a church trust in the East, if Parsons ever threatened her again. The bank was to call in the mortgage on his building immediately. And Hannah is not to know, Cole added, leaning forward. She thinks I am a drifter. Let her keep thinking about it. If you breathe a word of this to anyone, I will pull every dime of sterling money out of this bank and watch you collapse. Henderson swallowed hard and nodded. Understood, sir. Completely. Cole walked out with $20 in his pocket, enough to buy food, but not enough to raise suspicion. When he returned to the room, he placed a sack of flour, a bag of coffee, and a thick cut of beef on the table. Hannah stared at it. Where did you get this? She asked, fear spiking in her voice. Cole, please tell me you didn't. I worked, Cole said, shrugging as he hung up his coat. Miller had a stallion that needed breaking. Nobody else would get on him. I did. It was a half lie. He had broken the horse, but Miller had only paid him $2. The rest came from the Sterling account. You rode a bucking horse with those ribs? Hannah asked, horrified. I am healing, Cole said, turning away to hide the wince as he stretched. I am not as useless as I look. Hannah? She looked at the food, then at him. She sensed something he wasn't saying, a confidence, a shift in the balance of power. But she looked at Jem, who was eyeing the beef with hungry eyes, and decided not to question the miracle. February came with a vengeance. The blizzard that hit in the second week was a monster. The sky turned a bruised purple-black at noon, and by evening, the wind was screaming like a dying thing. The snow did not fall. It was driven horizontally, stinging like buckshot. The temperature in the room dropped until their breath hung in white clouds that did not dissipate. The window pane frosted over completely on the inside. Jem was coughing again, a wet, hacking sound that terrified Hannah. She had him wrapped in everything they owned, but he was still shivering. It is too cold, Hannah whispered, her teeth chattering. Cole was at the stove, feeding the last of the wood into the firebox. He watched the flame struggle against the downdraft. He knew they were in trouble. This was the kind of cold that killed cattle standing up. He turned to the bed. This isn't enough. He didn't ask this time. He didn't hesitate. He walked to the bed and scooped Jem up, blankets and all. Then he reached out and grabbed Hannah's hand. Get on the mattress, he ordered. Hannah didn't argue. She climbed onto the narrow bed. Cole laid Jem down, then lay down behind Hannah, pulling the boy between them. But this time, the bed was too narrow for separation. He pulled Hannah back against his chest, curling his large body around hers, sandwiching Jem and Hannah between himself and the wall. He pulled the heavy quilt over their heads, creating a cocoon. Stay close, he whispered against her hair. Hannah lay rigid for a moment. The intimacy was shocking. She could feel every hard plane of his body, his broad chest against her back, his thighs pressed against the back of her legs, his arm heavy and protective over her waist. But the warmth was immediate and overwhelming. It was like lying against a furnace. Slowly, the shivering stopped. Jem's breathing eased into a steady rhythm. The storm raged outside, shaking the walls, rattling the stovepipe. But inside the cocoon of blankets, the air grew thick and quiet. Hannah relaxed, her body molding back against his. She felt his arm tighten slightly around her waist. He shifted, burying his face in the curve of her neck to keep his nose warm. She felt his breath on her skin, hot, rhythmic. She smelled the scent of him, leather, wood smoke, and the salt of his skin. It was a masculine scent, intoxicating after so many years of sleeping alone. "You are not alone, Hannah," he whispered. The words were vibrating against her spine. "I have got you." Her heart began to hammer, a wild, frantic rhythm that had nothing to do with the cold. She felt a sudden, piercing ache in her chest, a longing so sharp it terrified her. She had spent years building a fortress around her heart, telling herself she only needed to survive. She had forgotten what it felt like to be held, to be protected. She shifted, turning slightly in his arms. Her hip pressed back into his groin. She felt his sharp intake of breath. His body went taut. A tremor ran through him, a vibration of restraint. He did not pull away. He did not move, but the air between them changed. It is charged with electricity, heavy and dangerous. Hannah couldn't help herself. The want was a physical pain. She twisted further, turning until she was facing him in the cramped darkness under the quilt. Jem was asleep lower down, a small warm lump between their knees, but their faces were inches apart. In the faint, red glow filtering through the weave of the blanket from the stove, she could see his eyes. They were dark, dilated, burning with a hunger that matched her own. He looked at her not as a widow, not as a landlady, but as a woman. He looked at her with a raw, naked need that stripped her bare. All the months of fear, of scraping by, of loneliness, gathered in her throat. She saw the same loneliness in him, the drifter who had nowhere to go, the man who blamed himself for death. "Cole," she breathed. He watched her, his gaze tracing the line of her jaw, the curve of her lips. He seemed to be fighting a war with himself, his hand trembling slightly where it rested on her hip. Slowly, giving her every chance to stop him, he reached up. He cupped her cheek, his palm rough and warm. His thumb brushed across her lower lip, dragging slightly on the soft skin. Hannah shuddered and leaned into his hand. That was the signal. The dam broke. Cole groaned low in his throat and closed the distance. His lips met hers. It was not a smooth, practiced kiss. It was hesitant at first, a question asked in the dark. But when Hannah opened her mouth, meeting him, pressing back against him, the hesitation vanished. The kiss deepened, becoming clumsy and desperate. It tasted of salt tears and smoke. It was a collision of two starving people finally finding a feast. Hannah's hands found their way into his hair, gripping tight. Cole's arm crushed her against him, pulling her so close she could feel the buttons of his shirt digging into her chest. "Hannah," he groaned against her mouth. "I have wanted, God, I have wanted you." "I know," she whispered, kissing his stubbled jaw, his neck, his mouth again. "I know." The storm outside was a distant roar, irrelevant. The only storm that mattered was the one under the quilt. They clung to each other, whispering half-formed apologies and prayers, their hands exploring, mapping the scars and the softness. Cole's hand moved down her back, pressing her hips into his. The heat of him seared through her clothes. Hannah felt a fierce, trembling surrender take hold of her. She wasn't just letting him in. She was claiming him. She was staking a claim on this man, this moment, this fire in the middle of the winter night. There was no room for shame in the dark, only the overwhelming, life-affirming reality of skin on skin, breath on breath. They moved together, shifting carefully so as not to wake the boy, finding a rhythm that was ancient and new. And as the wind howled its impotent rage against the walls, Hannah and Cole crossed the line from survival into passion, finding in each other a shelter that no storm could touch. The silence following a storm is a deceptive thing. It lies heavy over the land, pressing down with a weight that feels like peace, but often hides the wreckage beneath. Hannah woke into that silence. The howling wind that had battered the walls for 20 hours had vanished, replaced by a stillness so profound she could hear the settling of the stove's iron grate. She was warm, impossibly, luxuriously warm. She was tangled in a nest of wool and limbs, her cheek resting against a heavy flannel that rose and fell with a slow, steady rhythm. For a few stolen seconds, she did not move. She let herself float in the sensation of safety. There was a heavy arm draped over her waist, the hand broad and relaxed, holding her as if she were something precious that might slip away. The scent of him filled her nose. Wood smoke, dried sweat, and the deep, earthy smell of a man. It was a scent she had not realized she was starving for until it filled her lungs. She shifted slightly, her legs brushing against his beneath the quilt. The memory of the night before rushed in, not as a dream, but as a visceral, physical reality. The heat of his mouth on her neck, the roughness of his hands, the way she had arched into him, begging him in a whisper not to stop, abandoning every shred of caution she had spent years cultivating. The peace shattered. Reality crashed into the room like a stone through a window. She was a widow. He was a drifter. She was a woman whose reputation was hung by a thread in a town that fed on scandal like starving wolves feed on a carcass. And she had just spent the night in the arms of a man she barely knew, with her son sleeping inches away. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded her chest. She flinched away from his touch, sliding carefully out from under the weight of his arm. Cole stirred. He made a low sound in his throat, a sound of contentment, and his hand groped blindly for her in the space she had just vacated. Hannah scrambled off the mattress, her bare feet hitting the freezing floorboards. She grabbed her dress from the chair, her hands shaking so badly she could barely manage the buttons. She felt dirty. She felt foolish. She felt a terrifying, hollow ache in her chest that told her she had made a mistake that could not be undone. Behind her, the rustle of blankets signaled he was waking. "Hannah?" His voice was rough with sleep, deep and intimate. She froze, her back to him, buttoning her bodice up to her chin. "I have to get water," she said. Her voice sounded thin and brittle to her own ears. "The pump will be frozen." "Wait," Cole said. She heard him sit up. "Come back here for a minute. It is freezing out there." She turned, despite herself. Cole was sitting up amidst the tangled bedding. The quilt pooled around his waist. His hair was a dark mess, sticking up in tufts. The bruise on his ribs was a vivid purple against his pale skin. But it was his face that stopped her breath. He was smiling. It was not the guarded, polite nod he usually gave her. It was an open, unguarded smile, boyish and sleepy. His hazel eyes were soft, looking at her with a familiarity that made her knees weak. He looked like a man who had woken up exactly where he wanted to be. "Come here," he whispered, reaching a hand out. Hannah stared at that hand, the hand that had mapped her body in the dark. Shame burned through her, hot and agonizing. She could not look at him. She could not let him look at her and see the fear. "I have to get water," she repeated, the words tumbling out. "Jem will need breakfast." She grabbed the pail and practically ran for the door, ignoring the hurt confusion that flashed across his face. She threw the bolt and fled into the hallway, the cold air hitting her face like a slap. Outside, the world had been scrubbed clean. The storm had left the town buried under 2 feet of pristine, glittering white. The sky was a hard, brilliant blue, the sun blinding as it reflected off the snow. It should have been beautiful. To Hannah, it felt like an interrogation room. Everything was too bright. There were no shadows to hide in. She walked to the pump in the alley, her boots crunching loudly in the stillness. A few other women were already out, bundled in shawls, breaking the ice on the water troughs. As Hannah approached, conversation stopped. Mrs. Gable, the hotel owner's wife, looked up from her bucket. Her eyes swept over Hannah, from her disheveled hair to her flushed cheeks. She did not speak. She simply turned her back, presenting a wall of rigid wool to Hannah. Hannah felt the snub like a physical blow. She grasped the iron handle of the pump, her gloves slipping on the frost. She pumped furiously, the screech of the metal echoing in the alley. "They know," her mind whispered. "They can see it on you. They can smell him on you." She stared at the water splashing into her pail, trying to wash away the memory of the night. But the images would not leave. The way he had whispered her name, the way his strength had surrounded her. For 1 hour in the dark, she had not been a struggling widow or a charity case, but a woman who was desired. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting back tears. She could not afford to cry. Tears froze on my face in this weather. She hurried back to the room, head down. When she returned, Cole was dressed. He had made the bed and was sitting at the table, whittling a piece of kindling. He looked up when she entered, hope warring with worry in his eyes. "Hannah," he started. "I have chores," she said, bustling past him to the stove. She did not look at him. "Please, just let me work." Cole closed his mouth. He watched her for a moment, his jaw tightening, then stood up. He put on his coat and hat in silence. "I will go to the livery," he said quietly. "I will see if Miller has work." "That is best," Hannah said to the pot of water. He left, closing the door softly. Hannah sank onto the stool, burying her face in her hands, her body trembling with the effort of holding herself together. Cole walked to the livery with a storm in his own chest that matched the one that had passed. He felt raw. He had woken up feeling a kind of peace he had not known in years, a sense that, perhaps, finally, he had found a place where he fit. He had thought she felt it too, but the way she had looked at him, like he was a stranger, like he was a mistake, cut deep. "You ruined it," a voice in his head sneered. "You took advantage of her fear in the cold. She regrets it. She looks at you and sees a mistake." Guilt, heavy and familiar, settled onto his shoulders. He had promised to protect her, and instead, he had likely compromised her further. He reached the livery stable, the smell of wet hay and horse manure grounding him. Miller was there, along with 3 ranch hands who were stranded in town by the snow. They were leaning against the stalls, passing a flask of whiskey between them. "Well, look who it is," one of the hands said. He was a wiry man with a scar on his chin. A hand from the Box T Ranch named Skinner. "The widow's pet." Cole ignored him, grabbing a pitchfork. "I am here to work. Miller, work must be hard after a night like that." Skinner laughed. He nudged the man next to him. "Bet it was warm over at the boarding house last night, eh? Storm blowing outside, fire burning inside." Cole's grip tightened on the pitchfork until the wood creaked. "Leave it be, Skinner." "I'm just saying," Skinner continued, emboldened by the whiskey and his audience. "Must be nice. Most of us have to pay $1 at the brothel for a warm bed. I wonder what the widow charges. Or does she give a discount for—" The sentence ended in a wet crunch. Cole moved faster than a man his size should have been able to. He dropped the fork and crossed the distance in a blur. His right fist connected with Skinner's jaw with the force of a sledgehammer. Skinner flew backward, crashing into a stack of grain sacks before sliding to the floor, blood pouring from his split lip. The other 2 hands shouted and surged forward, but Cole spun on them, his eyes blazing with a terrifying, cold fury. He looked ready to kill. He looked like a wolf that had tasted blood. Get up!" Cole snarled at Skinner, who was groaning on the floor. "Get up and say her name again." "Hey!" Miller shouted, running over with a shovel raised. "Stop it! No fighting in my barn. You want to kill each other. Do it in the street." Cole stood panting, his chest heaving, his knuckles throbbing. He looked at the men, seeing the fear and the sudden recognition in their eyes. They weren't looking at a drifter anymore. They were looking at a man who knew how to hurt people. "Get out of here, Cole," Miller said, pointing to the door. "I cannot have this. Go on." Cole stared at Skinner one last time, then turned and walked out into the snow. He wiped his bloody knuckles on his coat. He felt sick. The violence had flared up so easily, so naturally. It was always there, just under the skin. "This is who you are," he thought bitterly. A fighter, a brute. Hannah was right to run, but the damage was done. By noon, the story had traveled from the livery to the saloon, and from the saloon to the kitchens. The stranger had beaten a man half to death, and he had done it over the widow Kincaid. Hannah knew nothing of the fight yet. She was fighting a battle on her own front. She had spent the morning scrubbing the floor, trying to scour away her anxiety. Around 2 o'clock, she went into the hallway to fetch the broom she kept in the closet. Mr. Parsons was waiting for her. He was standing at the top of the stairs, blocking her path back to her room. He smiled when he saw her, but it was a tight, angry smile. "Hannah," he said, "I heard some interesting news today. I am busy. Mr. Parsons?" Hannah said, trying to step around him. He moved, blocking her. "I heard your man is down at the livery breaking jaws, fighting over your honor, they say." He chuckled darkly, though I question how much honor is left to fight over. "Let me pass," Hannah whispered. "I also heard," Parsons said, his voice dropping, "that you have found a way to settle your debts. Funny thing, suddenly having money when you had none last week. And now you have a man in your bed." He stepped closer, backing her against the wall. The smell of him was overpowering. "If you are selling it—" "Hannah," he hissed. "Then I think the landlord gets first refusal. It is only fair. Consider it part of the rent." He reached out and grabbed her upper arm. His fingers dug into the flesh, hard enough to bruise. He pulled her toward him. "Get off me!" Hannah cried, panic spiking. She tried to twist away, but his grip was like iron. "I will scream! I swear I will scream!" "Scream all you want," Parsons sneered. "Who is going to help? The town already knows what you are. Get your hands off her!" The voice came from the stairs. It was not a shout. It was a command, heavy with the promise of violence. Cole stood on the landing. He was covered in snow, his face pale, his right hand wrapped in a bloody handkerchief, but his eyes were black with rage. Parsons looked up, startled, but he did not let go. "This is my building. Drifter, you are trespassing." Cole did not speak again. He walked up the last 3 steps. He moved with a terrifying, silent purpose. He reached out, grabbed Parsons by the lapels of his velvet vest, and shoved him backward. Parsons flew back, slamming into the opposite wall with a thud that shook the picture frames. He gasped, winded, sliding down to the floor. Cole loomed over him. He placed a heavy boot on the floorboards between Parsons' legs, leaning down until his face was inches from the landlord's. "I told you," Cole whispered, and the sound was worse than a scream. "I told you if you touched her again, there would be blood." "Cole, stop!" Hannah screamed. She threw herself at him, grabbing his arm. "Stop it! You will kill him!" Cole looked at her. For a second, he didn't recognize her. His eyes were glazed over with a red haze, a coiled rage from old wounds, from his brother's death, from the injustice of the world, from his own self-loathing. He looked like a man on the edge of murder. "He hurt you," Cole said, his voice flat. "I do not care," Hannah sobbed. "If you hurt him, we lose everything. Please, Cole, look at me. Please." The pleading in her voice cut through the fog. Cole blinked. He looked down at Parsons, who was cowering, clutching his chest. He looked at his own fist, raised to strike. He lowered his hand slowly. He stepped back, his breathing ragged. Parsons scrambled to his feet, his face purple with humiliation and fear. You maniac!" he sputtered, backing away toward the stairs. "You think you can bully me in my own house?" "I think I can break every bone in your body," Cole said wearily. "But she asked me not to." "You are done," Parsons shrieked from the safety of the stairs. "Both of you!" "I will have the town on you. I will tell everyone what kind of animals you are, charity cases, whores and murderers. You will be on the street before the week is out." He turned and fled down the stairs, his threats echoing in the stairwell. Hannah stood trembling in the hallway. She looked at Cole, her eyes wide with horror. "What have you done?" she whispered. Cole looked at her, his shoulders slumping. "I protected you. You just destroyed us," Hannah said. She turned and ran into her room, slamming the door. Night fell, bringing a heavy, suffocating darkness. The wind picked up again, rattling the loose board Cole had fixed, mocking them. They ate in silence. Jem, sensing the tension, ate quickly and scrambled into his bed, pulling the covers over his head. Hannah sat at the table, staring at the grain of the wood. Cole sat on the stool by the stove, nursing his swollen hand. "I am sorry," Hannah said finally. Her voice was small. "I should not have. I let things go too far, with Parsons, with—" Everything. Stop, Cole said. No, it is my fault, she continued, the words rushing out. I was weak last night. I was cold and I was weak, and I let you. Stop, Cole said again, louder this time. He stood up and crossed the room. Do not call it weakness, and do not apologize for it. How can I not? Hannah looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. Look at what happened today. The fighting, the threats. The whole town is laughing at us. Let them laugh, Cole said fiercely. I do not regret it. I do not regret a single second of last night. I have wanted you since the moment you dragged me out of that alley. Hannah stared at him, stunned by the admission. I have spent my whole life being cold. Hannah, Cole said, pacing the small room. Even when I was warm, I was cold. Last night was the first time I felt alive in 5 years. 5 years, Hannah repeated. Cole stopped pacing. He leaned against the wall, looking tired. 5 years since I left home. He looked at her, and the dam broke. He told her about the Double Bar Ranch, the thousands of acres of prime grazing land that stretched to the horizon. He told her about his father, a man made of iron and expectations. He told her about Elias, his younger brother, the gentle one, the one who was supposed to inherit because he had the patience Cole lacked. It was a dispute over a creek, Cole said, his voice hollow. Neighbors claiming water rights they didn't have. I rode out to cut their fences. Elias came to stop me. He said I was going too far. He said I would start a war. Cole looked at his hands. We argued. I shouted at him. I told him to go back to the house if he was too scared to fight. The neighbors rode up. Guns came out. Horses panicked. He closed his eyes. I saw him go down. I saw the hooves. I was 10 feet away, and I did nothing but hold a gun. Hannah listened, her hand covering her mouth. The image of the man before her, this strong, capable man, standing helpless while his brother died, was heartbreaking. People talked, Cole whispered. They said my temper killed him. They said I was too proud to back down. And they were right. I saw my father look at me, and I saw the blame. So I left. I left the money, the land, the name. I walked away because I couldn't stand to see them flinch when I walked into a room. Hannah sat in silence, processing the weight of his words. He wasn't a drifter. He wasn't a nobody. He was a rich man's son running from a ghost. You were rich, she said softly. It wasn't a question. I was, Cole said. But it didn't matter. It doesn't matter. It matters, Hannah said, a strange feeling rising in her chest. It means you chose this. You chose to be hungry. I never had a choice. Cole hesitated. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper, the receipt from the bank he had kept. He placed it on the table. I went to the bank yesterday, he said quietly. I used my name. I had them pay Parsons. Your rent is paid for the year, Hannah, and the back debts. He cannot throw you out, not legally. Hannah stared at the piece of paper. She should have felt relief. She should have felt joy. Instead, she felt a cold, hard knot tighten in her stomach. She looked up at him, and her eyes were dry and hard. You paid him, she said flatly. I wanted you to be safe, Cole said. I wanted to stop him from holding it over you. You went behind my back, Hannah said, standing up. Her voice rose. You used your family money you said you left behind, to buy my safety. What am I to you, Cole? Another charity case? A stray dog you feed to make yourself feel better about your brother? No. Cole looked shocked. It isn't like that. I care about you. You bought me. Hannah cried. You let me believe you were working in the stables, scraping by like me. And all the while you could have bought this whole town. You made me a fool. I was trying to help, Cole shouted back. Why is it so hard for you to let someone help you? Because help always comes with a price. Hannah threw the receipt at him. My husband helped by working himself to death. Parsons helps by wanting my body. And you? You help by throwing money at the problem so you can feel like a hero. But the heroes leave. Cole, rich men leave. I am not leaving. Cole grabbed her shoulders. I am trying to build something here, with you. With me? Hannah laughed bitterly, trying to pull away. What life? The scandalized widow and the rich rancher playing poor. You think you can live in this room with me? For how long? Until the novelty wears off? Until you miss soft sheets and steak dinners? I do not want that life. Cole shook her gently. I want this. I want the way I felt last night. Once I tasted that. Hannah, once I knew what it was to be with you, I knew I couldn't go back. I cannot be that cold, empty man anymore. You woke me up. I am not your redemption. Cole, Hannah said, her voice trembling. I am a woman with a child and a bad reputation, and you are a liar. I love you, Cole said. The words hung in the air, stark and terrifying. Hannah froze. She looked into his eyes and saw the truth of it. He meant it, and that terrified her more than anything, because she loved him too. And if she let herself believe in it, the loss would kill her. Do not say that, she whispered. Do not say that unless you can promise me that nothing will ever take you away. And you cannot promise that. No one can. I can promise I will try, Cole said, leaning his forehead against hers. I can promise I will stand between you and the world. Hannah closed her eyes, swaying toward him, her resistance crumbling. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him. But the world had other plans. The next morning, the sound of thundering hooves shattered the fragile peace of the town. Hannah was at the stove, making coffee. Cole was sitting on the bed, putting on his boots. They had barely slept, spending the night in a tense, silent truce, holding hands across the gap between the bed and the floor. The door to the street below slammed open. Heavy boots stomped up the stairs. There was no knock. The door to their room was thrown open. Mr. Miller from the livery stood there, looking pale. Behind him was a man Hannah had never seen, a tall, weathered man with silver spurs and a coat made of fine buffalo hide. He looked like he owned the ground he walked on. The man stepped into the room, his eyes sweeping over the poverty, the peeling wallpaper, the small stove. Then his gaze landed on Cole. He stopped. He took off his hat. Mr. Sterling, the man said. His voice was loud, booming in the small space. Found you. Hannah felt the blood drain from her face. Cole stood up slowly. He looked at the man with a resignation that broke Hannah's heart. Hello, Grady, Cole said. Your father sent me, Grady said, ignoring Hannah completely. He got the wire from the bank. He knows you are drawing funds. I figured he would, Cole said. He wants you home. Cole, Grady said urgently. It is bad. The winter hit the herds hard. We are losing cattle by the hundreds. And your father, his heart is giving out. He needs you. He is ready to forgive everything if you come back and take the reins. The words hung in the air like smoke. Forgive. Come back. Take the reins. Hannah looked at Cole. She saw the conflict in his face. She saw the pull of duty, of blood, of the land that was in his bones. She looked at Grady, with his fine coat and his air of authority. Then she looked at her own rough hands, her stained apron, her tiny, freezing room. The gap between them wasn't just a crack, it was a canyon. Cole looked at her. He opened his mouth to speak, to say something, but the words died in his throat. Hannah stepped back, her back hitting the cold stove. She heard only one thing. He had a kingdom waiting for him. And she was just the woman who had kept him warm while he was slumming. Go, Hannah whispered. Cole's eyes widened. Hannah, no! Go, she said louder, her voice cracking. Your father needs you. Your land needs you. You do not belong here. Cole, you never did. She turned her back on him, staring blindly at the wall, waiting for the sound of his boots walking away, waiting for the silence that would signal the end of her life. The secret of Cole Sterling's identity did not just whisper through Bitter Creek. It screamed. Within hours of the foreman riding out, leaving Cole standing in the middle of the room with his jaw set like granite, the entire dynamic of the town shifted. The man who had been a nameless drifter, a charity case, and a punchline was suddenly the heir to the double bar. one of the largest cattle operations in the territory, to the town. This revelation did not make Hannah Kincaid a heroine for saving a life. It made her a schemer. The narrative twisted with cruel efficiency. Women who had previously gathered at the mercantile to whisper about Hannah's loose morals now gathered to whisper about her cunning. They said she must have known all along. They said she had peered into the dirt of the alley, seen the quality of his boots or the cut of his jaw, and knew he was a prize worth trapping. They claimed she had played the poor widow to lure him in, using her own child as bait to snag a fortune. Hannah felt the change like a physical weight. When she walked down the boardwalk, heads did not turn away in disgust anymore. They turned with a mixture of envy and speculation. Men tipped their hats with a smirk that suggested they knew exactly what she had traded for a slice of the sterling fortune. She retreated into a shell of icy silence. She worked with a frantic energy, scrubbing floors until her knees bruised and her hands cracked and bled, refusing to look anyone in the eye. Cole did not leave. He had sent Grady back to the ranch with a message for his father that he would come when he was ready, and not a moment before. He stayed in the boarding house, sleeping on the floor, trying to catch Hannah's eye, trying to speak to her across the chasm that had opened between them. "Hannah," he said one evening, after Jem had fallen asleep. He stood near the stove, his large frame filling the small space. "We need to talk about this." "There is nothing to talk about," Hannah said, her needle flashing as she mended a tear in Jem's trousers. She did not look up. "You are Mr. Sterling. I am Mrs. Kincaid. That is all there is." "My name does not change who I am," Cole insisted, taking a step closer. "It does not change what happened between us during the storm. It does not change how I feel." "It changes everything," Hannah snapped, finally looking at him. Her eyes were rimmed with red, dark circles bruising the skin beneath them. "Do you know what they are saying? They say I trapped you. They say I am a gold digger. Before, I was just a whore in their eyes. Now I am a thief too." "I do not care what they say," Cole said, his voice rising. "Let me take you away from them. Marry me, Hannah. Let me take you and the boy to the ranch. You will never have to scrub another floor. You will never have to worry about rent or cold or hunger again. You belong with me. Not as a charity case, but as my wife, as my equal." The words hung in the air, shimmering with the promise of safety. For a heartbeat. Hannah wanted to say yes. She wanted to drop the basket of mending, walk into his arms, and let him carry her out of this misery. But then the memory of Elias rose up. Elias, standing in the doorway with his lunch pail, promising her that the double shift was safe, promising that he would be home for supper, promising that everything would be fine. Promises were just words. They crumbled under rock. They vanished in the wind. "And when you get bored?" Hannah asked, her voice trembling. "When you get tired of playing house with the washerwoman? When your father looks at me with the same look he gave you? What then? Cole, do you leave again? Do you ride off to find the next adventure, leaving me in a big house where I do not belong?" "I am not your husband," Cole said, hurt flashing in his eyes. "I am not the man who left you." "All men leave," Hannah whispered, turning back to her sewing. "One way or another. Please, just let me be." The winter broke, but it did not give way to a gentle spring. The snow melted into a sea of slush that froze and thawed in a miserable cycle. And then, abruptly, the moisture vanished. The wind shifted to the southwest, hot and dry, carrying the taste of grit. The mud dried into hard, cracked earth. The green shoots of grass withered before they could take root. The drought wind, they called it. It scoured the town, peeling the paint from the buildings and driving dust through every crack in the walls. The wells began to run low, the water turning silty and brown. Hunger returned, sharper than before. With the winter over, the sympathy of the few charitable souls in town evaporated. Work dried up as the ranchers tightened their belts against the coming drought. Then Jem got sick. It started as a cough, a dry hacking sound that echoed in the small room at night. Within 2 days, it was a fever that burned through his small body like a brush fire. He lay on the bed, his skin gray and papery, his eyes rolling back in his head. He woke only to cry for water, but the water wouldn't stay down. Hannah sat by his side for 2 nights straight, cooling his forehead with a rag dipped in the tepid water from the pitcher. She sang to him until her voice was a rasp. She watched the rise and fall of his chest, terrifyingly shallow, and felt the icy grip of terror squeeze her heart. This was how it happened. This was how the babies died. On the 3rd morning, Jem did not wake up. He lay limp, his breathing a thin whistle. Hannah counted the coins in the jar. 80 cents. It was all she had. She wrapped her shawl around her head to block the dust and ran to the doctor's office. Doctor. Albright lived in a 2-story house on the respectable side of town, behind a white picket fence that was now coated in brown silt. Hannah pounded on the door. The doctor's wife answered, looking down her nose at Hannah's dusty dress and wild eyes. "The doctor is at breakfast," the woman said sniffily. "My son is dying," Hannah gasped. "Please, he needs to see him." "Doctor." Albright appeared behind his wife, wiping egg yolk from his lip with a napkin. He looked at Hannah, then at the sky, then back to his warm hallway. "Mrs. Kincaid," he said, his tone weary. "I have told you before. My supplies are low. I have to prioritize." "I have money," Hannah said, holding out her hand to show the coins. 80 cents. I will scrub your floors. I will wash your linens for a year. Please." Albright glanced at the coins with disdain. Quinine and willow bark cost more than 80 cents. "Hannah, and frankly, I have several families who are current on their accounts, who are also under the weather. I cannot waste resources on—" He trailed off, but the implication was clear. "On trash." "He is a child," Hannah whispered. "He is 6 years old." "I will come by if I can." Albright lied, starting to close the door. "Maybe tomorrow." The door clicked shut. Hannah stood on the porch, the dust swirling around her ankles, staring at the painted wood. She felt a scream building in her throat, a primal sound of rage and helplessness. She banged on the door again. Once, twice, but the lock turned from the inside. She walked away, her legs numb. She was going to lose him. After everything, the hunger, the cold, the shame, she was going to lose Jem because she was 80 cents short of being a human being and Dr. Albright's eyes. Cole was mucking stalls at the livery when Miller mentioned it. "Saw the widow running back from the doc's place," Miller said, leaning on a pitchfork. "She looked like a ghost. Guess the boy is bad off." Cole dropped his shovel. He didn't say a word. He walked out of the barn, ignoring Miller's shout. He didn't run. He walked with a long, eating stride that covered the ground quickly. He went straight to Dr. Albright's house. He didn't knock. He kicked the door open with enough force to crack the frame. Albright and his wife jumped up from the table, the doctor dropping his coffee cup. "What is the meaning of—" Albright began. "You have medicine," Cole said. His voice was low, calm, and utterly terrifying. "For fever, for congestion." Yes, but—" Albright stammered, looking at the dirty, large man in his hallway. "Get it," Cole said. "Now see here, you cannot just barge in." Cole stepped forward. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a gold piece, a $20 coin he had kept sewn into the lining of his coat for emergencies. He slammed it onto the dining table, the heavy metal denting the wood. "My name is Cole Sterling," he said. "My father is John Sterling of the Double Bar. You know the name." Albright went pale. Yes, of course, Mr. Sterling." "You are going to pack your bag," Cole said. "You are going to give the boy everything he needs. You are going to go there now. And you are going to tell anyone who asks that you did it because you are a charitable Christian soul. If the boy dies, Dr. Albright, I will personally see to it that you never practice medicine in this territory again. I will buy this building and burn it to the ground." Albright scrambled. Yes, sir, immediately. I will send my boy over with the drafts right now." "Do it," Cole said. "And if you ask her for a single penny, You answer me." Hannah was sitting by Jem's bed, dipping the rag into the basin, when a knock came at the door. She didn't move. She didn't have the strength to answer. The door opened. It was the doctor's delivery boy, a pimply teenager looking terrified. He held out a brown glass bottle and a packet of powders. "From Dr. Albright, ma'am," the boy squeaked. He said to give him a spoonful every 2 hours, and the powder is for the fever." Hannah stared at the bottle. She stood up slowly, her legs trembling. She took it. It was good medicine, the expensive tincture. "I cannot pay for this," she whispered. "It is paid for," the boy said, backing away. "Full up, the doctor said. He said the rancher took care of it, Mr. Sterling." The boy turned and ran. Hannah stood frozen. The bottle felt heavy in her hand. Relief washed over her. Jem would live. She had the medicine. But right on the heels of relief came the hot, bitter bile of humiliation. The rancher. He had done it again. He had gone behind her back. He had used his name, his money, his power to fix her life, proving once and for all that she was helpless without him. She gave Jem the first dose. She watched as his breathing eased within the hour, the fever breaking into a sweat. She kissed his damp forehead, thanked God, and then let the anger take her. She found Cole that evening in the alley behind the livery. The wind was picking up again, the sky turning a sickly, bruised yellow. He was splitting wood for Miller, the axe rising and falling with a rhythmic thud. "You," Hannah said. Cole stopped mid-swing. He lowered the axe, turning to face her. He saw the empty medicine bottle clutched in her hand. He saw the fury in her eyes. "Is he all right?" Cole asked quietly. "He is sleeping," Hannah said. "The fever broke." "Good," Cole said, leaning on the axe handle. "That is good." "How dare you?" Hannah hissed, stepping closer. She shook the bottle at him. "How dare you go to him? How dare you pay for me like I am some pet you are keeping?" "He was dying, Hannah," Cole said. "Miller told me. I wasn't going to let him die because of your pride." "My pride?" Hannah shouted, her voice cracking. "It is not pride. It is my life. You think you can just walk around this town waving your gold and fixing everything? You make me look like a fool. You make me look like a woman who trades favors for coin. Did you tell the doctor that? Did you tell him I am your kept woman?" "I told him my name," Cole shouted back, his patience snapping. "I used the only thing I had that would make him listen. I didn't do it to shame you. I did it because he is a little boy and he was suffering." "You controlled me," Hannah said, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. "You took away my choice." "You didn't have a choice." Cole threw the axe down. It clattered against the woodpile. "You had 80 cents and a dying son. That is not a choice, Hannah. That is a tragedy, and I had the power to stop it. I would rather starve than be your charity case," Hannah sobbed. "And I would rather have you hate me forever than watch that boy die," Cole roared. The silence that followed was sudden and absolute. Cole stood there, chest heaving, his hands shaking. "I know what it is," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I know what it is to stand there and watch someone you love stop breathing. I know what it is to do nothing. I carried that with Elias. I will not carry it with Jem. I won't." Hannah stared at him. She saw the crack in his armor. She saw the terrified man beneath the rancher's sun. Before she could speak, the light changed. The yellow sky didn't just darken. It vanished. A wall of brown moved over the sun, plunging the alley into a twilight gloom. The wind didn't howl. It screamed. "Dust!" Cole said, looking up. His eyes widened. "Hannah, run!" It was the black roller. A wall of dust a mile high, moving faster than a galloping horse. It hit the town with the force of a physical blow. The air turned solid. Grit filled their mouths, their noses, their eyes. "Jem!" Hannah screamed, turning toward the boarding house. Cole grabbed her hand. "Go! Move!" They ran blindly through the choking dark. The sand stung their skin like needles. They couldn't see the buildings 5 feet away. They stumbled over crates, over the boardwalk steps. Coughing until they retched, they burst into the boarding house hallway. The air inside was thick with dust that was being forced through the walls. Parsons was there, banging on doors. "Shut the vents!" Parsons was screaming. "Secure the roof! It is going to blow!" Hannah scrambled up the stairs, Cole right behind her. They reached the room. It was terrifying. The window boards were groaning under the pressure. The air was unbreathable. Jem was on the bed, coughing violently. Half conscious. "We have to get down," Cole yelled over the roar of the wind. "The roof won't hold. This is an old building." As if to punctuate his words, a beam above them cracked with a sound like a gunshot. Plaster rained down on the bed. Hannah froze. Terror, icy and paralyzing, gripped her. She couldn't move. Cole didn't wait. He scooped Jem up in one arm, grabbing the blanket. He grabbed Hannah's arm with his free hand. "Move!" he ordered. They reached the landing. Parsons was coming up, his face covered with a handkerchief. "Get back in your rooms," Parsons shouted. "You are letting the dust in. Keep the doors shut." "The roof is going," Cole shouted. "We have to get to the cellar or the stable. You are not going anywhere." Parsons blocked the stairs, arms spread. "You leave, and the draft will take the roof off the whole building. Get back! Get out of my way!" Cole growled. "No!" Parsons yelled. "This is my property." Another crack from above. The ceiling over the hallway bowed. Dust poured down like water. Hannah screamed as a piece of lath struck her shoulder. Cole's eyes went black. He didn't argue. He didn't hesitate. He dropped his shoulder and rammed into Parsons. It wasn't a gentle shove. It was the impact of a bull. Parsons flew backward, his feet leaving the floor. He tumbled down the steep, narrow stairs, crashing against the railing, his limbs flailing. He landed in a heap at the bottom with a wet snap and a high-pitched shriek. "My leg!" Parsons screamed. "You broke my leg! Murderer! He tried to kill me!" Doors opened. Other tenants peered out, coughing. "He is crazy!" a woman shouted. "He threw Mr. Parsons!" Cole didn't stop. He stepped over Parsons' writhing body, clutching Jem tight against his chest. "Hannah, stay with me!" Cole roared. They burst out the front door into the maelstrom. The wind nearly knocked them flat. It was impossible to see. Cole navigated by memory and instinct, dragging Hannah toward the livery stable across the alley. "The barn!" Cole yelled. "It is low! It is sturdy!" They stumbled into the livery. The big sliding doors were rattled but held fast. Inside, the air was still thick with dust, but the wind was muffled. The horses were going mad. They were kicking their stalls, screaming in terror, the smell of ozone and dust driving them into a frenzy. "Get in the tack room," Cole ordered Hannah, shoving her toward the small enclosed room at the back. "Take the boy." He handed Jem to her. Hannah collapsed into the corner of the tack room, huddled under a horse blanket. Cole turned back to the main barn. He didn't hide. He walked down the center aisle, into the chaos of the thrashing animals. Hannah watched through the cracked door. She saw him move to the stallion's stall, the killer horse. The animal was rearing, smashing its hooves against the wood, ready to break out and trample everything in its path. Cole walked right up to the bars. He spoke. Hannah couldn't hear the words over the wind, but she saw his body language. He was calm. He was steady. He reached through the bars, stroking the horse's nose, letting the animal smell him. Slowly, miraculously, the stallion dropped to all fours. Cole moved to the next stall, and the next. He was a rock in the middle of the river. He was solid. He came back to the tack room 10 minutes later, covered in dust, his eyes red-rimmed. He slid down the wall next to Hannah and Jem. He wrapped his large arms around both of them, pulling them into his chest. Hannah pressed her face against his shirt. She could feel his heart beating, slow, heavy, strong. The wind raged for 4 hours. They sat in the dark, the dust coating them like gray snow. Hannah listened to Jem's breathing, which was raspy but steady. She listened to Cole's heartbeat. She thought about the medicine. She thought about the roof cracking. She thought about Parsons flying down the stairs. She thought about the way Cole had walked toward the screaming horses. She realized then that she had been wrong. She had been looking at the money. She had been looking at the name Sterling. She had been blinded by her own pride and her own fear of being bought. But money didn't hold a roof up in a wind like this. Money didn't calm a terrified horse. Money didn't carry a child through a blinding storm. A man did that. This man. She looked up at him in the gloom. He was looking down at Jem, his hand resting protectively on the boy's head. He looked tired. He looked dusty. He looked like the man she had found in the alley. Only now, he was the one saving her. The storm died out just before dawn. They emerged from the livery into a world that had been erased. The street was gone, buried under 3 feet of brown drift. They looked at the boarding house. The roof over the 3rd floor, where Hannah's room had been, was gone. It had collapsed inward. The chimney had fallen through the floor, crushing the bed where Jem had been sleeping hours before. If they had stayed, they would be dead. Hannah stared at the ruin. Her clothes, her mending basket, the jar with the coins, the few keepsakes of her husband, all gone. Buried under timber and dirt. She had nothing, literally nothing. She was standing in the street in a ruined dress, holding a sick child, with no home, no money, and a landlord who would likely demand her arrest. She started to shake. It wasn't cold. It was a shock. Cole moved to stand beside her. He didn't touch her. He just stood there, a solid presence at her shoulder. "You do not have to stay here," he said quietly. Hannah looked at the wreckage. "I have nowhere else." "You do," Cole said. He turned to look at her, his face streaked with dirt. There is land over the hills, green grass, water that runs clear, a house that has stood for 40 years and never lost a roof. Hannah looked at him. "It is not charity," Cole said, his voice rough. "I am not asking you to come because you are poor. I am asking you to come because when that roof cracked, the only thing I could think about was you. Not the ranch, not my father. You." He took a breath, his hands hanging open at his sides. "I cannot imagine my life without you. Hannah, I do not want to be Cole Sterling alone. I want to be the man who stands beside you." Hannah looked at the town that had called her names, the town that had let her starve, the town that had watched her struggle and done nothing. Then she looked at the hills in the distance, where the sun was just starting to break through the haze. She looked at Cole. She saw the fear in his eyes, the fear that she would say no, that her pride would be stronger than her heart. She shifted Jem on her hip. She reached out and took Cole's hand. His fingers closed around hers, tight and desperate. "Show me," she whispered. The dust settled, but the town of Bitter Creek did not. In the wake of the black roller, the air remained thick, not with grit, but with a simmering, poisonous tension. The destruction of the boarding house roof had left a scar on the street, a jagged reminder of the violence of the plains. But the violence of men's tongues proved far more enduring. Mr. Parsons, nursing a badly sprained ankle and a bruised ego, had taken up residence in a room at the hotel, paid for by the very funds Cole had secretly deposited. From his armchair, he held court with anyone who would listen. His version of events was painted in broad, dramatic strokes. The drifter had gone mad. The drifter had tried to kill him. The drifter and the widow had weakened the roof supports to spite him. And when he tried to save the building, Cole had thrown him down the stairs with murderous intent. It was a lie. But in a town bored by winter and hungry for scandal, a lie traveled faster than a telegram. Hannah and Cole were staying in the tack room of the livery stable. It was cramped, smelling of saddle soap and horse sweat, but it was dry. Hannah spent the first day paralyzed by a fatigue that went down to her marrow. She had lost her home. She had lost her possessions. She had nearly lost her son. She could hear the whispers when she went to the pump for water. "That is her," a woman murmured, pulling her shawl tight. "The one who set the brute on poor Mr. Parsons. They say she planned it," another whispered back. "Trying to get at the Sterling money. Dangerous, that one." Hannah kept her head down, but inside, a cold, hard stone was forming in her chest. She was tired of flinching. She was tired of apologizing for surviving. Cole paced the length of the stable aisle, his boots kicking up straw. He watched Hannah polish a spoon with a rag until the metal nearly wore through. He saw the way her shoulders hunched, waiting for the next blow. "We could leave tonight," Cole said quietly. He stopped near the tack room door. "I can buy 2 horses from Miller. We can be 20 miles gone by sunrise." "You never have to see these people again." Hannah looked up. The temptation was sweet, to just disappear, to ride away into the anonymity of the night. "If we leave," Hannah said, her voice rasping, "Parsons wins. His story becomes the truth. He gets to say he ran the whore and the murderer out of town." "Does it matter what they think?" Cole asked. "We know the truth." "It matters to me," Hannah said, standing up. She walked to the door, looking out at the slice of gray street visible through the cracks. "I have lived my whole life with my head down. Cole, I let the mine boss tell me my husband's death was an accident when I knew it was greed. I let the town call me a charity case. I let Parsons corner me in the hall. If I run now, I am running forever." Cole looked at her. He saw the steel spine beneath the worn calico dress. He nodded slowly. "Then we stay," he said. "We stay and we finish it." That night, the livery was quiet save for the shifting of hooves and the soft snoring of Jem in the corner. Hannah and Cole sat on overturned buckets, a single lantern burning low between them. The conversation that followed was not the frantic, heated exchange of the storm. It was slow and measured, stripped of pretense. "I was ashamed," Cole admitted, staring into the flame. "Not of the ranch, but of myself. When Elias died, I felt like I had destroyed the only good thing our family had produced. I left because I wanted to be no one. I wanted to be a man without a past." He looked at Hannah. "But living in that room with you, watching you fight for every scrap of bread, watching you love that boy, it made me want to be someone again. You made me want to be a man worthy of that kind of fight." Hannah reached out, her hand hovering over his before settling on his scarred knuckles. "I pushed you away because I was terrified," she whispered. "I told myself it was because you were a drifter or because of the gossip. But the truth is, I looked at you and I saw how much it would hurt to lose you, and I knew I could not survive being hollowed out again." "You will not lose me," Cole said, turning his hand to clasp hers. "I am not going anywhere unless you are with me." "Then we face them," Hannah said. "Tomorrow, the meeting at the saloon." The meeting had been called by the town council, a loose collection of business owners and busybodies, largely organized by Parsons's loud complaining. The stated purpose was to discuss public safety and the vagrant element. The real purpose was a public lynching of character. When Cole and Hannah walked into the Golden Steer the next morning, the room went dead silent. The air was thick with tobacco smoke and the smell of stale beer. 30 or 40 people were crammed inside. Shopkeepers, miners, ranch hands, and the wives who usually would not set foot in a saloon but would not miss this spectacle for the world. Parsons was sitting at a table near the front, his foot propped up on a crate, a cane across his lap. He looked smug. "Well," Parsons sneered, "the rats have come out of the barn." Cole did not rise to the bait. He walked to the center of the room, Hannah right beside him. He stood tall, his shoulders square, the bruise on his cheek fading to a dull yellow. He looked every inch the rancher's son now, possessing an authority that had nothing to do with clothes and everything to do with bearing. "I hear there is a discussion about what happened at the boarding house," Cole said, his voice calm and carrying to the back of the room. "I thought I should be here to correct the record." "The record is clear," Parsons shouted, banging his fist on the table. "You assaulted me. You nearly killed me." "I shoved you," Cole said flatly. "Because you were blocking the stairs while the roof was collapsing over a sick child. I told you to move. You refused. I moved you." "He is lying," Parsons appealed to the crowd. "He has a temper. Look what he did to the man at the livery. He is a violent animal." "I hit a man who insulted Mrs. Kincaid," Cole said. "And I would do it again, but I did not try to kill you. Parsons, if I had wanted to kill you, You would not be sitting here drinking whiskey." A ripple of uneasy laughter went through the men in the room. They knew the truth of that. "And what about her?" Parsons pointed a shaking finger at Hannah. "The widow who brings strange men into her room. The woman who plans to cheat honest landlords out of their due? She is no better than a common streetwalker, scheming to get her claws into the sterling fortune." The insult hung in the air, sharp and ugly. Hannah felt the eyes of the town boring into her. Shame pricked at her skin, but she remembered the nights of hunger. She remembered the cold. She remembered the way Cole had held her. She stepped forward. "I am not a schemer," Hannah said. Her voice shook on the first syllable, then steadied. "And I am not a whore. I am a mother who washed your clothes until my hands bled to pay for a roof that leaked." She turned to look directly at Parsons. "You want to talk about payment? Mr. Parsons? Tell them about the arrangement you suggested." Parsons' face went blotchy. "I do not know what you are talking about." "Tell them," Hannah said, her voice rising. "Tell them how you came to my door when I was 3 days late on rent. Tell them how you put your hand on my arm. Tell them how you said there were softer ways to pay." The room went very quiet. The women in the crowd exchanged glances. "She is lying," Parsons sputtered. "She is hysterical." "I am not lying," Hannah said. She looked out at the crowd. "He cornered me in the hallway. He told me that a woman alone needed protection. He told me that if I was nice to him, I would not have to work so hard. And when I refused, he doubled my rent." She looked at Mrs. Gable, the hotel owner's wife. "He did it to Mary Miller before she left town, didn't he? And to the girl who washed dishes at the cafe?" "Mrs." Gable looked at her shoes, then slowly nodded. "Mary said he wouldn't leave her alone." "That is enough," Parsons shouted, trying to stand up. "I am a respected businessman. You are a lecher and a bully." The voice came from the bar. It was the saloon owner, a burly man named O'Malley. He was wiping a glass with a rag. He looked at Parsons with open disgust. "I have seen you with the girls who work here. Parsons, you are rough, and you are cheap. The widow is telling the truth." Parsons looked around wildly. The mood had shifted. The men were looking at him with narrowed eyes. In the West, you could be hard, you could be violent, but preying on a widow who was trying to pay her way, that was low. That was cowardly. "Doctor." Albright cleared his throat from the corner. He looked at Cole, then at the floor. "Mr. Sterling paid for the boy's medicine," the doctor said quietly. "He paid in gold, and he told me that if I asked Mrs. Kincaid for a penny, I would answer him. He didn't want her to know." The narrative cracked open. The image of the scheming widow and the violent drifter dissolved, replaced by the reality of a woman fighting off a predator and a man protecting her. Cole stepped forward again. He didn't gloat. He didn't shout. "We are leaving," Cole said. "Not because you are running us out, but because this town is too small for the truth. Parsons, keep the rent money I paid you. Use it to fix your roof. But if I hear that you have touched another woman in this town, I will come back, and I won't be pushing you down the stairs." He turned to Hannah. He offered her his arm. "Ready?" he asked. Hannah looked at Parsons, small and defeated in his chair. She looked at the townspeople, who were suddenly finding the floorboards very interesting. She took Cole's arm. "I am ready," she said. They walked out of the saloon and into the bright, sharp sunlight. The air tasted clean. Cole led her back to the livery, where Miller had 2 horses saddled and waiting, paid for, this time, with a fair hand and honest coin. Jem was sitting on the fence, holding the wooden horse Cole had carved for him. Cole turned to Hannah. He took both her hands in his. "I cannot promise it will be easy," he said. "My father is a hard man. The ranch is isolated. The work never ends. But it is good land. Hannah, and it can be ours." Hannah looked back at the street one last time. She saw the leaning buildings, the dust, the poverty she had worn like a second skin for 5 years. She thought of her husband's grave on the hill, a lonely mound of stones. She said a silent goodbye to him. "I did my best, Elias, but I have to live now." She looked at Cole. She saw the man who had broken a stallion with a touch and broken a landlord with a shove. She saw the man who had kept her warm when the world froze. "I do not want easy," Hannah said softly. "I want a life." She lifted her chin. "Let's go home." The journey to the double bar took 3 days. It was Hannah's first time riding more than a few miles in years. Her muscles ached, the sun beat down on her neck, and the dust coated her throat. But it was the sweetest pain she had ever known. They rode through vast, rolling plains of sagebrush and scrub oak, the land stretching out until it hit the sky. Cole rode beside her, pointing out landmarks. The hawk circling a thermal, the track of a coyote, the hidden spring where they could water the horses. At night, they camped in the shelter of rock outcroppings. They made simple fires of dried brush and cooked coffee and beans. Jem fell asleep quickly, exhausted by the adventure. One evening, under a canopy of stars so bright they looked like spilled diamonds, Hannah and Cole sat close to the dying fire. "I was scared," Hannah admitted, leaning her head on his shoulder. "That night in the storm, I was so scared that I was using you, that I was just hungry for anyone." Cole wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "And now, Hannah said, turning her face to his. "I know it wasn't just hunger. It was recognition. I saw you, Cole, under the dirt and the bruises. I saw you." He kissed her then. It wasn't the desperate, frantic kiss of the blizzard. It was slow, deep, and deliberate. It was a kiss of promise. It was a kiss that said, "I know you, and I choose you." The fire popped, sending sparks drifting up toward the Milky Way. The darkness wrapped around them, not as a threat, but as a blanket. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, they crested a high ridge. Cole pulled his horse up. "There!" Hannah shielded her eyes. In the valley below, nestled along the curve of a silver river, lay the ranch. It was a sprawling collection of weathered log buildings, corrals, and barns. Cattle dotted the hillsides like peppercorns. It wasn't a palace. It was rough-hewn and working, but it looked permanent. It looked like it belonged to the earth. They rode down into the yard. Hands stopped their work to watch them pass, touching the brims of their hats to Cole. An old man came out onto the porch of the main house. He leaned heavily on a cane, his hair white as snow, his face a map of deep lines. Cole dismounted. He walked to the porch steps. He took off his hat. "Pa," Cole said. John Sterling looked at his son. He looked at the scars on Cole's hands, the gray in his stubble, the way he stood. He looked past him to Hannah and the boy on the horse. "You took your time," the old man rasped. His voice was gruff, but his eyes were wet. "I had things to finish," Cole said. "I brought someone." Cole reached back. Hannah dismounted, her legs stiff. She walked to his side. Cole took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. A public claim, a defiance of any judgment. "This is Hannah," Cole said. "And Jem, they are with me." John Sterling looked at Hannah. He saw the worn dress, the tired eyes, the proud set of her jaw. He saw the way his son looked at her, like she was the anchor that held him to the ground. The old man nodded once. "Dinner is at sundown. Do not be late." He turned and went inside. It wasn't a hug. It wasn't a speech, but in the West, it was a welcome. The months that followed were not a fairy tale. They were working. Hannah learned that being a rancher's wife, or soon-to-be wife, was not a life of leisure. She learned to cook for 20 hungry men. She learned to ride the fence line, checking for breaks. She learned to use a rifle to keep the coyotes away from the chickens. She found a strength in her own body she hadn't known existed. Her hands grew calloused, but they healed. Her face browned in the sun. She walked with a new stride, echoing the rhythm of the land. Jem flourished. He grew 2 inches in 6 months. He shadowed Cole everywhere, learning to throw a rope, learning to curry a horse, learning to read the sky for rain. He stopped coughing. He started laughing. The neighbors were slow to accept her. At church on Sundays, a 2-hour ride away, the other ranch wives whispered behind their fans about the widow from town who had snagged the Sterling heir. Hannah held her head high. She didn't try to charm them. She simply did the work. When the influenza swept through the valley that winter, Hannah was the one who rode out with soup and medicine, nursing the families who had snubbed her. When the wildfire threatened the Box T Ranch, Hannah was on the line with a wet sack, beating out the flames alongside the men, her face blackened with soot. Respect didn't come with a title. It came with sweat. And slowly, the whispers stopped, replaced by nods of recognition. 2 years later, in the heat of late August, the true test came. A dry lightning storm sparked a fire in the north pasture. The wind was howling, driving the flames straight toward the house. Cole was out on the range with the men, trying to cut a fire break. Hannah was at the house, heavy with children, their second. She didn't panic. She organized the evacuation of the livestock. She soaked blankets in the horse troughs and nailed them over the windows. She stood on the porch with a shotgun, watching the wall of orange crests the hill, refusing to leave until she knew Cole was safe. He rode in through the smoke, his face wild with fear, screaming her name. "I am here," she shouted, grabbing the bridle of his terrified horse. They fought the fire side by side, choking on smoke, eyes burning, beating back the embers that landed on the roof. They fought for the house they had built. They fought for the crib in the nursery. When the wind finally turned and the fire turned back on itself, they collapsed on the porch, covered in ash, exhausted beyond words. Cole pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her smoky hair. "I thought I lost you," he choked out. "You are stuck with me." "Cowboy," Hannah whispered, pressing her hand against the kick of the baby in her belly. "We are rooted here." The story ends on a quiet morning, 5 years after the alley. It is dawn. The sky to the east is bleeding gold and violet, lighting up the snow-capped peaks in the distance. Hannah stands on the porch, a thick wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders against the morning chill. She holds a steaming mug of coffee. Inside the house, she can hear the soft sounds of Jem getting ready for school and the gurgle of their daughter. Sarah, waking up? Cole steps out onto the porch behind her. He is older now, the gray at his temples more pronounced, the lines around his eyes deeper, but he moves with a peace he never had before. He wraps his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Penny for your thoughts," he murmurs. Hannah leans back against him, closing her eyes. She thinks of the boarding house. She thinks of the despair that tasted like dust. She thinks of the stranger she dragged up the stairs. Heavy and broken, "I was thinking about the storm," she says softly. "The one where the roof fell in. Bad night," Cole says, tightening his hold. "Best night of my life," Hannah corrects him. "It knocked the walls down." Cole smiles against her neck. He turns her around so he can look at her face. He runs a thumb over her cheekbone, a gesture as familiar to her now as her own breath. "I love you." "Hannah Sterling," he says. "I know," she says. They turn together to watch the sun crest the horizon, flooding the plains with light. The land before them is harsh. It is unforgiving. It will bring more storms, more droughts, more trials. But as the golden light hits their faces, they are not afraid. They are standing on their own ground, roots deep in the earth, holding each other up against the wind. Thank you so much for journeying with Hannah and Cole through the storms and the sunshine of the American West. I hope their story of resilience and love touched your heart. I would love to hear where you are listening from today. Please leave a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on the story. Did Hannah make the right choice? If you enjoyed this tale, please consider subscribing to From Wild West for more stories of grit, romance, and the untamed frontier. Until next time, keep your boots dusty and your heart open.